Hi, I'm Anthony James. Back in 1994 I was running a UFO group called the East Midlands UFO Research Association, and we made contact with Peter Robbins and Larry Warren, who stated that they were coming over to England to research for their book Left at Eastgate. We arranged to meet them down there. They gave us a tour on site, which is already on YouTube, and this second video, the one I'm introducing now, was filmed 2 weeks later at one of our meetings. There was over 100 people there. This video you're about to see, after about 6 minutes into the lecture, Peter Robbins states that we're going to break for the video, and then the video that we're breaking for is the one shot on location. The video you're about to see now was filmed of the first ever public talk about the Bentwaters Incident by Larry Warren and Peter Robbins at the Bentwaters Centre in Nottingham. So this is now 2019. I've been out of the UFO subject for quite a few years, now and then just poking my nose in and out, and I've become aware that there's now two camps. There's the Peter Robbins camp, Larry Warren camp. I'm in none of them. I'm not even on the fence. I don't care either way. The purpose of putting this video out is to show you the videos that I recorded at the time. There's plenty more where this came from. This is to show you the videos, what I've got, all recorded in 1994, and make your own mind up. I don't want any bashing on my YouTube page. This, to me, just a record of the event. Okay, enjoy. For those of you that's not been to any of our meetings before, my name is Tony James. I'd like to thank you all for coming, especially those who've travelled a long way to get here. I'd like to point out that hopefully all our future meetings will be held here at the Bentwaters Centre. Tonight we have been honoured by two American guest speakers, who are Larry Warren and Peter Robbins. In 1980, Larry Warren was stationed at Bentwaters in Suffolk and was a member of the 81st Tactical Support Group. He was an eyewitness to the main events at Rendlesham Forest on the third night of the 3 nights of events. Peter Robbins is a UFO researcher and works with Bud Hopkins as his assistant at the Intruders Foundation. He is also giving lectures worldwide. Larry and Peter have also co-authored a book called Left at Eastgate, which is due out soon, and it's all about the Rendlesham Forest incident and the events years before that, how it came about and what's happened after that, up to date. And only 2 weeks ago we was down in Rendlesham Forest at the time, digging up more information on that. There will be a 30-minute break at 7:45 for refreshments, and there should be a question time at the end of the presentation, but we're going to relax that. If anybody wants to say anything, Larry and Peter, just stick your hand up and we'll do your best to answer the question. So now I'd like to introduce you to Peter Robbins and give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Good evening. How are we all doing tonight? Fine, thank you.
Well, I have to tell you on behalf of Larry and myself, it is not just a pleasure to be here, it's an honor. Sometimes we forget that important things can happen in places with a kind of modest surrounding. What will happen in this room over the next 4 hours is nothing short, we feel, of historic. It's the first time an eyewitness, a member of the Air Force security police officers who was stationed here at RAF Bentwaters in Suffolk during the incidents that most of you should be familiar with, called the Rendlesham Forest incidents, the Bentwaters incidents, Woodbridge incidents, whatever, will be speaking to a British audience, the audience that should know more than any audience what the real facts were around these happenings. I became involved in a very particular way, and before we take a look at some of the footage that Tony shot for you and meet Larry, I just want to give you a little background on who I am and where I fit into this. As Tony said, I am a researcher. I'm an independent researcher. I don't belong to MUFON, the big American organization. I'm lucky enough to have made a number of wonderful friends in the work in the States and here as well. Bud Hopkins, who, for those of you who follow this kind of thing, is probably the most respected individual in the very disturbing area of UFO abduction research, and is acknowledged so worldwide, but is also a very respected painter. And my background is as a painter and a film historian. I've known Bud, I knew Bud for quite a number of years just as an artist before I became involved in this work, and have worked as his assistant on a full part-time basis for the last several years and as a close cooperating friend and associate for many years before. Many of you, many of us in this field, whether we're directly involved or just follow it seriously or are curious and want more information about what is real in this area and what is not, we get into it because we are intellectually stimulated and we're curious. There are others of us, though, who get into it because of something more compelling. The latter would cover me. When I was 14 years old, and my sister, one of my sisters, was 12, and really in the middle of a very nice, happy, middle-class childhood, growing up about 30 miles outside of New York City in a very pretty suburb, we were playing on the front lawn of the house that we grew up in. It was 1961, and an absolutely beautiful June late morning, early afternoon. And I caught something out of my right peripheral vision, and I said, "Helen, look," or "look up." And we looked in time to see 5 silvery white, disc-shaped objects approximating the size of commercial airplanes at a distance, coming in at a very high rate of speed and stopping, absolutely stock still, perhaps 1,000, 1,200 feet up over the neighbor's house, the Parkers who lived across the street. These things, whatever they were in an extremely precise military V-type formation. They looked like brushed aluminum, and they had regular yellow detailing around the edges that we could only read as windows. Well, if you've ever had a sighting, you go into a rather altered situation, and your senses become very sharp. Even as a youngster, I was a very serious kid and went through a real quick series of checklists. Reflecting back at this time, I realized that I went through, these are not this, these are not that. You're stuck with the fact that they look like machines from the science fiction movies, and I was hooked. More happened, but it's not germane at the moment. What is germane at the moment is to get into that I became a researcher, that I met Larry Warren in 1987 at the big MUFON conference in Washington, D.C., marking the 40th anniversary of the phenomena. And shortly after, he invited me to write a book with him on this subject that he had been battling around for already 7 years. I agreed. I was looking for a serious project to get involved in, and so began our work together. I can tell you right now, as one of the great understatements of my life, that I had no idea of what I was about to get involved in. What we're going to do right now is take about 35 minutes and look at some footage that was shot 2 weeks ago, where Larry Warren will take you through what happened on that night that he was involved in December of 1980. This is the first time that any audience has seen any of this footage here or abroad. And as such, I'd especially like to thank Tony and Carol James for not only being our sponsors, our host and hostess, our entertainment committee, and just all-around good folks, but of putting together in Fora a perfect example of a grassroots group that is simply put together to bring real information to people who are hungry for it. So, Tony, can we cut the lights and just turn on the machine and get rolling on this?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to give a warm welcome to my friend and co-author, Larry Warren.
It's a pleasure. You're the first audience in this country I've ever been able to speak to. So it's very new to me, it's thrilling, it's exciting. This is very informal. Hopefully you'll be entertained, and any questions you want to fire off at us at the end, fire away, and we'll do the best we can to handle them. And again, I have to thank Tony James and all the gang here. They're really valuable. One thing I'd like to also make a point of, because I do this off the cuff. Every time I've tried to pre-write these things, I just throw it away. I don't know what I'm doing. But these organizations are very important to all of us. Most of us come to these meetings. Forget me, I have been in the circus for a long time, but folks like you who pay your money to come into them, you buy the books, you rent the videos, you have that interest because perhaps you've seen something in your life that changed your life, which you were taught as a child didn't exist, and then suddenly you realize, wait a minute, something's wrong here. I was very much the same way. I was also brought up to, when something was wrong, say so. I'm not a saint, I've done wrong things in my life, but I've always been, one good valuable lesson my parents taught me is to cop to it when you're wrong. And so I thank them for that. I went into the Air Force in America for a very regular reason. It wasn't to become a UFO witness, it wasn't to write books, it wasn't for any of these innocuous things you get accused of over the years. I was born in New York City. I think the best way to start this is like, who the heck am I, right? We're always these UFO people. We have more to our lives than that stuff. I was born in Manhattan and New York. Got out of the zoo early on and grew up in Westchester County, very middle class and all that. And very conservative parents from Boston. I got all the old values from Great Britain, I can tell you. And grew up a very normal life, basically as normal as you can grow up, right? And had no talk of UFOs in my home, or my parents certainly had no interest. Relatives had no interest. As I proceeded through high school, I spent a year here in Great Britain, in Essex, as an exchange student. I loved England. I've been a Beatle fan ever since I can remember. Frankly, you've saved music for us. You sent it back better than we invented it, I think, in the rock and roll area. And just had to get over here. I fell in love with it, had my first girlfriend who was English, can't go wrong. And I didn't have particularly the grades for college. In America, it's a big thing, you know, you're in your senior year, and what school are you going to? And most of my friends were rock and rollers, and too high to notice where they were going. I decided that wasn't the route for me, and I figured the military might be an idea, especially the Air Force, because the Army didn't have bases here, or the Marines, and I wasn't into really being in the military. Figured a nice cushy job, you know, security police had berets, I didn't have to go through special forces training to get it. It was, you know, much less, and I could get to London every weekend if I could. So I had a motivation. It was based purely on fashion to go in the Air Force, a beret, and also to travel. I got to RAF Bentwaters on December 1st, 1980. And that was after completing extensive air-based ground defense training and nuclear weapons tactical training and everything else. Sadly, a very big part of the story, which I never was able to talk about early on years ago out of fear of our security ills. Forget UFOs, that's not their major concern. They can slough that off. We're all liars, fools, out for money, or whatever you want to paint us as. They include y'all in it too, I can tell you. We had at RAF Bentwaters in Woodbridge, and I knew this before I got here, the largest nuclear arms dump in all of NATO. We had 100,000 kilotons of tactical nuclear weapons split between the two bases. And in 1980, if you check back your history books, the Cold War was still going on, and that was a very strongly held secret. In fact, we have civil engineers come on the base and build hardened nuclear-proof plane hangars. And if we were asked about what we kept in the WSA, weapons storage area, we were told to tell them that we had a giant cork. And if they asked too many questions, we'd pull it and England would sink. That was a true thing they told us to tell you guys. But most people in the area and the region did suspect that there was something more to the bases than just A-10s flying off on training missions. It certainly wasn't the case. The security police in the Air Force have two different divisions. There's the law enforcement division, which is basically your Bobby and base law enforcement things, arrests, civil disobedience, all that. For me, it was more of a combat readiness, like a SWAT team. Remember that show on America, SWAT? It's pathetic, I know, but we were trained much like those guys. And worked a very lonely job. You'd be out in a flight line, walking around the plane, make sure no one steals it. And that was it. And of course, occasionally you get assigned to the weapon storage area. And I have to tell you, standing next to a tactical nuclear weapon, which is a little shorter than this table, is very unnerving, because one of those, because we were trained in all our capacities and explosive capacities, could have removed East Anglia with no problem. And we were around them, and some of the folks in the Air Force were rather clumsy. I saw one dropped once off a thing, and you know, it was amazing. Military intelligence, that's an oxymoron for you. You've heard a little bit about the event, and the event is much debated. If any of you have questions, you've been poisoned with misinformation, misrepresentations on what I've said through the years and what other people have said through the years. And that's all right. I do have to say I'm sad Jenny Randles isn't here today, and though I have had differences with Jenny over the years, she is a trooper, and she has put many years into the search for the truth on this, and we all can be criticized for different things, but I say hats off to her for her fight. Over here you have much less chances of getting any information on a government cover-up of any kind than we do, though it isn't much easier across the pond. After the event you heard me try to describe there, I didn't realize that was going to be shown here while we did it, but it does come back to you, going back to that field. There's no way it can not. This changed my life forever, and hopefully it will be a positive outcome. I'm going to pick it up with the next morning, what happened. I went back to our barracks after these events, and any particulars I will get into if you wish later on the event again. We stopped off at Central Security Control, which is our place. You don't get on to duty, you don't work on a flight line in the Air Force if you're on drugs, okay? We have a thing called guard mount where you're inspected every night. If you're on a prescription, if you've been drinking, if you're mentally unstable, you're just not working. That's the bottom line. So rumors about us having drug parties in the woods, man, give me some of those drugs, because you cannot imagine this stuff. I've never drank and hallucinated or anything. You're totally straight when you're on this job. We have nuclear weapons. All the guys involved in this are really the straight arrows, I have to say, pretty much. Very reputable people, trained observers, not out to invent stories. We certainly know that lighthouses do not move, because this was followed, and we knew the Orford Ness Lighthouse was out there, and this would have been happening every day in that base's 40-year history, and it certainly didn't. The very next morning, hours after this event, I was back on Bentwaters in this area where we could have coffee. We were relieved from duty early. It was with a lot of lower-ranking guys. I'd only been on the base a month. I was very bummed out that John Lennon had been assassinated. That was a pale, you know, for a lot of us younger guys, it was awful. It was a very loaded time in our history, you know, really, that month. We had problems in Poland with solidarity, and the Soviets, we knew, because we were in a black phase, which meant we were a step away from war. Most of our planes at this time at Bentwaters had gone off to FOLs, forward operation locations in Germany. The reason for that is that the Soviets had tanks massed on Poland's borders and were going to move in if the Polish army didn't do anything with this outrageous movement for freedom. And So we were ready, and we were very close to confrontation. So the aircraft being explained for this event is just out of the question. It wasn't a Harrier jump jet. It wasn't any of that. We knew what they looked like. Then you have to explain the pilots. English people are taller than that, I know it. We do this with humor sometimes. In America, early on, I used to be criticized strongly for, taking swipes at myself and, in fun, and taking swipes at the event. But it breaks tension for me because it still comes back. And I don't think we all have to be bored, do we, with this stuff. We can enjoy it, we can have fun, we can learn. That morning, I sat and was made fun of with a number of other of my peers who went through this event by guys coming on to duty on the day shift. And they had heard accounts and little green men, and we got it all. I noticed that my eyes were watering profusely. I was in a lot of pain. I had a metallic taste in my mouth. I had a shock of gray hair. I looked like Mel Gibson from The Road Warrior, and I wasn't alone. It was just a mess, actually. I went back to my room. I put on a record called, an Eric Clapton record, and I played the song Blues Power. It was very appropriate, I think, at that time. Sat there. We had not been debriefed yet. I knew that. I suspected that was coming. Then again, I'm saying, you're dreaming this, man. This can't be real. Nevertheless, I went and had breakfast. And I sat at a rather segregated table, the security police table, because no one else wanted to be around us. Even in the Air Force, people didn't like cops. And I sat down, and I was still in uniform, and we looked at each other, and all of us had been involved pretty much, and just staring, see who was going to make the first move, and it was Sergeant Peniston at the end of the table. I was sitting about here with my tray, and my buddy Steve Longero looked at me. He's from Milpitas, California. I hope he's around. And said, what the hell happened to us? And I started to, my tradition of flapping my mouth, and Sergeant Peniston told me to shut the expletive up. And I said, whoa, here's the old boy network kicking in already. It was very green in the Air Force. I went back, I got up and left. The buzz in the room was that, these guys had something happen to them. I got back, and I really had this overwhelming urge to call somebody. To talk to somebody about this. It seemed like the invasion of the body snatchers. The base didn't seem the same anymore. It seemed very ominous. I didn't feel right about anything. About 10 o'clock, I got a notice through our day phone to report up to the Chief of Security Police's office. The law enforcement desk for a debriefing. It was very clearly on the note. I arrived there at 11 sharp, actually 2 minutes late, and I was reprimanded by our Major Ziegler, Malcolm Ziegler, who was the Chief of Security Police at Bentwaters, who had peripheral involvement in the events also. He said to me that, when you make a point of being late, then we had disaster preparedness go over about 6 or 7 of us with Geiger counters. I was very scared at this point. We're going to get into that later because a lot of us were adversely affected, and it is documented by these events. As it stands, we have grounds for a class action suit against the United States government if we could get some unity. In the UFO field, there's no unity between organizations. Well, I can tell you in the Bentwaters Incident, all of us witnesses should be united, and there's no unity either. It's very strange. But we went into the chief's office. They cleared out one particular prisoner who had a plastic bag on and was arrested for some reason. We were first told to sign documents. A table was set up. There was 10 documents on it at the law enforcement desk. Each of these documents, you ever hear of JANAP 146? Those of you, in America, it's a big thing. JANAP 146, that says if you talk about UFO events, you go to jail, plus a $5,000 fine, rub salt in the wound. And that was not the case. JANAP 146, to clear this up for you, is just a simple security oath. It means nothing to do with UFOs. It's never been enacted either against someone talking about UFOs, because obviously that would show them to be covering it up. So a lot of this misidentifications of documentation come from people that work in the military or are familiar with the paperwork. What disturbed me about this paperwork was that there was a pre-typed statement, and it read the same for each of us, and it stated basically that we were off duty, number one, and we saw just lights flipping amongst the trees. Each one of them read the same because we weren't allowed to do anything but sign our name and social security number or reread it. We were ushered into the office. Now, we were greeted not by men in black, as the story I've been Oh, God. We were greeted by men in gray business suits from the United States. And first of all, they were very unfriendly looking. They had plastic laminate ID badges. And it said Armed Forces Security Services and other things with their picture. Through our research, Armed Forces Security Services is a field arm of the National Security Agency, which is very dirty bird in this whole story. They're not CIA and all that stuff. And also one Commander Green from the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, in London. The Air Force did not debrief us. We sat down in a row of metal folding chairs, less than are in this room, certainly. And according to rank, and I was an airman first class, most of us went to senior airman. That was it. They did it according to rank structure, and God knows what they told the NCOs and then officers. No idea. We went through a lot of, they never once mentioned UFOs, aliens, anything. They said this phenomena, or this problem, if I recall they said it as, has existed longer than any of us in the room was aware. They did not tell us they come from Zeta Reticuli, they live under the ocean, they are ET, nothing. And we sat there and listened, and throughout all this, and a lot of it was flag waving and propaganda, and I've never been one to be a follower, funny enough, and that annoyed me about the military. I hear a hum to my left, and on my right, excuse me. And the funny thing is, I look over, there was a lot of Bible belters. You know, in America we have the Bible belt, they used to ban the Beatles, ban everything, ban the Mothers, ban you look at them wrong, you're banned, just in the name of Jesus. And we had a lot of guys like that in the Air Force. And if you can imagine, in that very stringent faith, there's no one bigger than Jesus. Or certainly no one's coming here to Earth or from other places. And this shattered a lot of guys. I could see them disintegrating mentally over the next few days. This humming sound was coming from this guy. I look over and he's reading a small handheld pocket Bible. Non-stop. And that was really sad because this person was dead within a week. And we'll go into that. This isn't a fun, you know, I enjoyed sharing this. It was important that lives are lost in this event. You don't read that in Sky Crash or anything. These are things the government in my country and yours don't want to know. They went on, they explained virtually nothing other than threatening us that if we communicated these events via the mail, via the telephone, or in any way, shape, or form, we would be reprimanded because now we have new security clearances. We had top secret clearances. Now, this is funny because I had a secret clearance, that's all I had. It takes about a year to get that first level. The next level of clearance, the top secret, takes about a year and a half to be cleared for, and their reasoning, if I recall, was that if we should divulge the information, the penalties would be stiffer than if we just maintained a secret clearance. I do doubt that we were issued top secret clearances. I think it was a scare tactic. Face it, most of us were 18 and 19, so. My next thing that happened in that room was that we were shown a film, a screen a little larger than this. It was a non-narrated film. I won't go into it because I have heard other people that have seen it. They've described it frame by frame. It is a debriefing tool. It does only one thing, confuse you even more about what you may have gone through. It showed stock footage, gun footage from going back to World War II all the way up to our NASA programs through Vietnam. Well, honestly, if I had the film, I'd be very rich, I'll tell you. And they have this kind of information. The film stopped. We were left to absorb it as we would. Be true to the flag boys, the Air Force will be good to you, and government, civilian life will be good to you if you toe the line, and all kinds of things. No threats, no one will kill you, other than this. Myself and this other guy kind of asked, we were allowed to ask a few questions, and one was simply, what happens if we did tell this? And the AFSS guy looked at us and he said, well, simply, those bullets are cheap. And everyone laughed, and it was very kind of sick, and they said it with a smile. But this is the government I thought I was serving, you know, representing my country. And right at that point, I was disgusted with it. It got beyond, was it a UFO I saw? Was it an alien craft? Were there aliens? It got beyond that. I saw my government as more of a threat than anything. They have their own modus operandi and agenda. And the Ministry of Defense, unfortunately, is a lackey of the United States government. You can see it if you follow the paper trail. You should demand answers on these things, I'll tell you. We're doing it in America. Don't let them get away with it. Later in the day, we were told that there was diversionary landing sites made and created falsely in case the press would arrive. I didn't know at the time that RAF Watton, the radar station nearby, had tracked these objects on 3 nights. The U.S. Air Force went to them, explained exactly what happened. Can we borrow the tapes? They took the tapes away. This was debated in your House of Lords and so forth, quietly. Because those tapes were never returned, this caused a political disaster almost that was quietly covered up. Over the next few days, very strange things happened on this base. I will move on to say that life on RAF Bentwaters was very different from this point. I started to do some digging on my own. Should tell you later that day, I don't listen well. I took a friend of mine, another witness to these events, Greg Battram, and went to a public phone and called my mother. And I got on, and I reversed the charges on New York telephone. I said, Mom, you know, you're never going to believe this. Last night we saw a UFO landed on the base. She's not there anymore. And I looked at my friend, and I said, my God, she's gone. And I called back the operator, and she said, are you calling from the base? I said, yeah, because you were cut off at the base. I knew I was in trouble because we have a thing called ComSec, which is communication security. And we learned about that in security police, but I forgot about it quick. I figured English, you know, the box phones like you had back then, figured, oh, they're not going to watch that. Our base was in such heightened security after this. Anyway, I was later called into the base Hardin Command Center, and after numerous denials on my part, they played me a tape of my phone call and offered me 2 choices. It's kind of a funny ending to this one. First choice was that I could lose my stripes, and God, I only had 2 stripes, and I signed up for 6 years to get them. I'm pathetic. And the other one was a fine of $300. No letter of reprimand, which would have been on a record book. That would have been in a file. None of that. But Larry, through the kind assistance of your chief of security police, you have these 2 options. I said, well, let's go with the money. And finding good, I signed whatever they had there, and honestly, the money was deducted from my pay over the next, I think we were paid every 2 weeks, minimally. We had President Carter at the time. But, so, went through all that stuff. And to shoot ahead to the year 1986, I'm married and all this. I get in the mail, and I'm very public in this stuff, trying to be anyway, to get this truth out. I get a letter in the mail, and this is after a lot of evidence came out because of my flapping my mouth. I get a letter from the Department of the Air Force's accounting service out in Denver, Colorado. I said, what the hell could this be? I open it up, and it says, Mr. Warren, when you were at RAF Bentwaters, you incurred a debt to the United States government of $95. The remainder of this debt is $95.06, something like that. And you must repay it, or else we're going to turn you into the IRS, the Gestapo of America, Internal Revenue Service, and you know, we're going to spank you and all kinds of things. So I wrote back a letter. I said, I'm not going to ignore it because tax time was coming up, and I wanted to get something back. And those were the days when you could get something back in taxes. So I wrote them a letter, and I said, Dear sirs, or captains, or colonels, or whatever you are, I will be happy to remit this debt to you if you send me a statement explaining exactly how I incurred this debt. Needless to say, I was never approached by the IRS. We have these letters, anything. My taxes were okay until we started writing this book. But anyway, this is a story. I want to press on into life past Bentwaters, because it's been amazing. How does some clown like me end up in this position? Well, it's quite by accident. It was something I didn't say, I want to be an infamous UFO figure. I didn't want any of that. I got out into civilian life. I left the Air Force honorably in May of 1981. I worked with the hostages when they came back from Iran. I was very proud to do that. Had a reporter from the Los Angeles Times just before we spot an Air Force base say, you know, how do you feel about this? And I said, hey man, 2 months, I felt like saying 2 months ago, you missed the biggest story of all time. And, you know, President Carter was giving out medals and all this crazy stuff. I left the Air Force as fast as I could, honorably. I was digging around the base. They knew I was put in back office because I could type, and was watched constantly. And it's not a Men in Black story, but I was just a troublemaker with this thing. I had one guy that came onto the base from Arizona and who had no knowledge of the events at all. And I said, man, Mark, I'm going through all kinds of hell. They were trying to set up drug busts on most of us. They were sending us on temporary duty assignments to Egypt, all over the world. There were guys I never saw again. The guy reading the Bible, just as an amendment to that, 2 weeks later, he had gone AWOL. He went home. I remember him telling a bunch of guys he wanted to go home to Illinois. We called him Eggs. His head looked like an egg. You know, as we made fun of each other back then. And he was a rural kind of guy, real nice. But he was destroyed with this. You can see him starting to really kind of lose it. And he was picked up in Chicago at O'Hare Airport by the FBI and returned, they're a real organization, believe it or not, and returned to Heathrow Airport. He should not have been put back on duty, especially in the capacity we worked. And sadly, I was working with a tech sergeant this particular night in the vehicle patrol. It was one of the last few nights I worked on shift. I was a threat on the flight line. That he called in and threatened to kill himself, which occasionally happened, but they allowed this to happen. We and another vehicle patrol responded. It was too late. He put an M16 in his mouth. So that was the first time I'd ever seen death, too, and I do directly relate it to these events. And that's why when some people, hey, skepticism is great. I welcome it. I welcome questions. And, you know, I ask them, I don't believe everything that comes down the pike. This is certainly a hard story to swallow. But if you can take the time and use your investigative skills and just a little bit of your heart, you're going to find that not just Bentwaters, but this stuff is more real than it is false, or lighthouses, or reflections off birds' stomachs. And, you know, you will find these things. And I do personally hold the Air Force accountable for that death. We have documented 2 others. I left the Air Force quite happily. In 1981, I expected to return to a pretty good life, but America was in a massive recession at the time, which seems to be holding. I got out and kind of put this out of my mind. I told my mother very briefly about what had happened to me. And I told a few friends, we were having some beers, and they were like, oh, yeah, right. And I started drinking an awful lot. It could be very destructive and very dangerous to my family. I was suffering from, I wish I knew then, post-traumatic stress syndrome, which a lot of other witnesses went through and still go through. I've been lucky to work this out of my system in front of people, for better or for worse, for 13 years or so. A lot of these guys are not. They're living in terror to this day. I can't imagine. I know Vietnam vets, I always get along good with them because they can see the lunacy in my eyes too, that we've seen this stuff. They just always say, hey man, at least we knew who the enemy was, you know? And that's true, a lot of them say that. But as time went on, I got frustrated, you know, with this. I dreamt about it every night. I had very strange dreams happening. I had phone problems at home, and it was kind of difficult to explain why. I didn't even think, you know, that this cover-up really was as deep as it was. You just can't imagine how it happens, and you see it go on. And I went down to Connecticut to go to school to live with my dad. I really destroyed virtually my relationship with my mother and stuff for a while. And I get down there, my father laid down the rules of the house, and I was to follow them, and I continued to move into drug use, a lot of things, and this is before I was even public with this. Anything to dull these things. I was having physical problems directly related to this event. I didn't know it at the time. And all these things, which I can look back now because my life is pretty good, thank God, and I can't imagine I allowed myself to go down those routes. But I did. And in Connecticut, one day, it was 1982, I had a oral surgery. I had a wisdom tooth taken out. And you can imagine how miserable that is. And I had a whole bunch of stitches. And I get home, and I look in the Hartford Courant newspaper, and I see this article with a woman, and I believe just a woman, and a paper mache model of an alien. And she even had a name for it. And I said, what a loony, you know, oh God. I must call them right away. I did, just like that. And I called him up, and it turned out to be her husband, Bob Luke, who's married to Betty Andreasen, who's famous for the Andreasen affair. Wonderful people. And I called Bob up. He was at a Toyota. He was a mechanic. And I said, I'm not drunk, but I've got to talk to someone other than my family about something I went through in the Air Force. Come over, have coffee, cake, let's party. So I got over to Bob and Betty's house. and that papier-mâché creature was in the corner. But they were really genuinely wonderful people. Sadly, it was a little creepy. Betty had lost 2 boys in a horrible car accident, and I looked actually an awful lot like one of her sons, so it was they took me in a bit. My father, meanwhile, back at home, had no idea about this. He always wondered why I was in the Air Force for only a year. How did he pull that off? I should also tell you, I'm fighting at this point to get back into the military. I got out with an honorable discharge. I find I have a re-enlistment code that does not exist, yet is in effect. It is valid. It is a classified code. You bring up my Social Security number on a computer and it says, do not process, nothing follows. I got my local congressman involved, who chairs the Congressional Armed Forces Committee, and he's an advocate for the armed forces, who ignored me, and virtually ignored me, and I was a constituent of his. He plays a big part in the story, and we'll show you some hilarious slides in a while for government explanations on why I couldn't get back here. You're going to enjoy that. I moved on. How I got Betty Andreasen knew these 2 guys named Larry Fawcett and Barry Greenwood. And Larry was a detective in northern Connecticut. Barry was a postal worker in Massachusetts, and their specialty was going after government documents in the FOIA. I said, yeah, I'll talk to him. Larry meets with me and his wife Lois, and I talk about the incident to a degree. Now, those of you who are familiar with this event, and any length, if you've read a lot about it, you'll notice that in clear intent, and this is the only thing that I did, and here's my reasons for it. I said in that book, and of course they knew the truth by the end of it, but they still published it, what's new. I said that I, up to a certain point, saw the object, passed out, woke up in my room. The simple reason was that I was not going to be someone to talk about aliens. I wasn't going to be the first one to talk about aliens. Let other guys come out, and then I'll confirm it. That was my hope. Nevertheless, they published it that way. And Art Wallace, I never made up that name. I always went under my own name. The UFO community will eat itself with those tactics. They did mystery, and we've got this witness. Hey, man, it's for everybody. It's not from Cause. It's not from MUFON, before. It's everybody's information. Take it, accept it, throw it out, do whatever you want with it. But it's not. It shouldn't be one group hold on to something. We should all share. Even candy, if anyone has any. Well, we really should. And that's a lesson I've seen over the years. Larry said, "Oh, we're going to file and get the information on this." We'd heard rumors about this from Great Britain. Meanwhile, within a week, I gave them the information on what they'd need, basically. They filed. They got 5 denials from the Department of the Air Force. Hilarious explanations, by the way, some matching our pre-written statements. And I went to a store one day. I saw in Omni magazine that there was an account of this event, but other witnesses were talking. I said, "Oh, damn, man," and it had nothing to do with me. And I was already public, and it was just reinforcing my, hey, I can't go wrong. It's going to come out. Well, in 1983, June, I think Larry Fawcett calls me up and he goes, "Larry, you're never going to believe this. We got it."
No, it's 84 June.
It all blends together. 84 June, "Larry, you won't believe this, we got it." And I said, "What did you get, a cold, a flu?" And he said, "No, we got a document from the Air Force that verifies pretty much what you're saying." And I'm saying, "I must see it." He sent it to me, and sure enough, the HALT document, as it's known, we'll be showing it to you also, was released. And I was thrilled. I was like, my God, I mean, I never thought anything would come out of this. I really didn't. I didn't even want to talk about aliens. I'm not saying these were aliens. I mean, some people don't like to believe these things have pilots, but in my experience, they have something inside that has heads and arms and legs, big eyes, like it or not. I just hope you don't have to experience it. That's all I say. The difference here is that now I was in a public realm with this. I was the golden child of ufology. I was the Beatles of flying saucers. And I had no idea, as Peter said earlier, what I was getting into. I was going through college trying to get a career in line. I worked in the music business and very fine people. And had a wonderful future wife coming along who hated this stuff and hated me being involved in it. I finally sat down with my father, and a very successful businessman, international, and the last guy I thought would believe any of this this, and he was very supportive. That my parents know when your kids are bullshitting them, right? And my parents knew I wasn't. We moved on through this madness. I started doing conferences, and you know, that was exciting. It's not a real big high for me to stand up in front of this. It's an honor to do it for you, but it's not like an ego boost for me. I was on stages in front of 20,000 people at times, working with very famous people many times in my life, but that wasn't it. It was basically, like I said earlier, it was doing something right. I started to see, and I do not mean any harm to Jenny Randall's here at all. I want to state that up front. And if you're taping, I hope everyone's taping if you can, or taking shorthand. I mean no harm to her, but the truth is that these two women in Suffolk, who started their investigation in earnest, there's no question, were, number one, fed false information by a witness they called Steve Roberts. Steve Roberts I knew because I was shown a picture of him by Dot Street, was the daytime desk sergeant at law enforcement. He could not have been involved in the events. That disturbed me, but the story recounted was rather accurate because by that point everyone had heard something. There were many key elements here you'd have to know to be involved. Get on track here. TV things came. All the money came in the world. Right? Never happened, believe me. CNN did a groundbreaking expose on their special assignments in 1985 called UFO, the Bentwaters Incident, interviewing a number of people involved in the events due to the fact that I'd given them the names of these people involved. Had I been lying, the last thing I would do is give the names and social security numbers of people that would say, he's a goddamn liar. Not one of them said that. They say, he's telling you the truth, I'm not going on the record with it. It's a fact. We have a good relationship with the reporter to this day, who's still hooked on this story. I talked to other witnesses at that point. We started to really rehash a lot of things. Some had some very unpleasant experiences of their own go on to them. Their lives were upside down. Divorces were happening. I was married by now in the mid-'80s, and my marriage was certainly on the rocks from the beginning because of this. We'd have some very overzealous people feeling that I was property, and you know, I will talk to him. My wife was one to say, well, jump in a lake, you're not talking to him. I started to get angry. I felt the UFO community or people, you know, you guys are the researchers. I'm talking to the researchers in this room, been at it for a long time, not just the folks with a curiosity. And I'm not identifying any of you, but a lot of us go to you because we can't go to the TV or the media because, in my opinion, they're the enemy next to the government. They distort and everything else. It takes a little bit. Do a few interviews and you'll know what I mean. But the thing is that we go to people like you to get answers. Though you can't give us answers, I know that, but at least you could help us. We all feel that way. Anyone who's seen a sighting say, what the hell is this? My friends laugh at me only because they're frightened. Believe me, they don't disbelieve, they're scared. And I felt betrayed. I felt these people were distorting what I said. Some were making a little bit of money off my name. I certainly wasn't. I set out at the very beginning. This sounds like I'm waving my flag, but Christ, no one else was doing it for a long time. Or accurately, that I made it a point not to accept any money for speaking engagements, nothing. I thought it would hurt my credibility. Didn't matter. I was going to be crucified with this thing. It was the whistleblower, and I'm no different than Karen Silkwood, unfortunately, luckily I'm alive, or any of the other people that have blown the whistles on something when it's wrong, both here in this country, my country, and any country. You know, Amnesty International exists for these reasons also. We moved on through the 80s, and by 1986, I was disgusted with the whole thing. Witnesses would come out. Colonel Holt made really obscure statements. He was the principal guy that made the tape and the document. But I will tell you right now, we interviewed Colonel Holt last year, and we conducted the most extensive interview to date with Colonel Holt. And Colonel Holt told NBC's reporter Lee Spiegel, who was on the UN panel in '78, by the way, trying to get this information out, at Tinker Air Base, that indeed there were a life form seen and that Gordon Williams was involved in the events. The Air Force has gone to great lengths to protect General, who made General, he's retired now, Gordon Williams. We do not want you to know that this guy really was involved, because the whole house of cards is going to fall down. Colonel Holt, unfortunately, and I do not mean him any harm, but sadly, we were nothing but gentlemen with this former officer. We recorded every conversation with him. Peter developed a rather good relationship with him over a year and a half. Sent him the tapes. We're up front with him totally. And Colonel Holt has done nothing but contradict himself. Believe me, contradict himself. It's a shame, because he would have been a great asset to this. But in a court of law, Colonel Holt's testimony right now would be removed because it is too contradictory on the record. And that's sad. Most of you people don't know that. We have a misnomer in this work that if a person is an airman first class, well, he's less believable than a guy that was a colonel. And I'll tell you why that's wrong. Colonels retire, and colonels are on pensions. That particular colonel was forced into writing a document and a memo 2 weeks after the fact and had his name attached to it, being the fall guy for a lot of other senior guys that were responsible not only for covering up this UFO event, but the death of Air Force personnel, and also exposing us to nuclear elements that were adverse to our health. Colonel Holt was the fall guy. Colonel Holt can't say anything supportive of me or others, as he says, because he has to say what he says, and probably till the day he dies, we could see the frustration in his face. He was very friendly and decent to me in person. I don't mean to deface him, but unfortunately, get off that old thing that if they're high-ranking, they're going to give you the truth. That must be the truth. It's bunk. These guys are locked in. They need to live on something, and retirement is held over their head like a carrot. It's a fact. I had nothing to lose. I don't have a retirement or anything, and I lost it all already anyhow. As time went on, I saw so many distortions in books, and I don't want to spend time on Sky Crash right now, but I'm sure some of you have read it. I bought it on R.A.F. Bentwaters, to be honest with you. And though the book historically dealing with the area is very good, it's very informative, helped us out in our work. Jenny did a great job, but unfortunately she was fed a lot of information that was inaccurate. Interviews I never conducted, statements. If you open the flyleaf, it says, if they know my name, they'll blow my head off in the street or something. Number one, that isn't even a speech inflection of mine. That isn't how I speak. It's something I never said. And it was a very lurid thing. The publisher could have done that. But I got sick of seeing myself misrepresented. I decided as my marriage was collapsing that, heck, I better get on to something. And I'm going to write this down, have a book out. I needed a researcher with me to be non-biased, someone separated from it. I had one gentleman that didn't work out. And finally, in 1987, in June, I spoke at the MUFON conference in Washington, D.C. This was supposed to be a big affair due to the fact it represented the 40th anniversary of modern UFO studies, and all the folks were there at the time. And I had a slot on, on the second day or third day, and I was going to speak and do my thing, and there was a lot of people there. And the darndest thing is that as soon as I got up there, my time got cut down to 15 minutes. And that, you're cut, they're telling me. And I'm like, and I was right at the microphone. Number one, in any speaking situation, I was rude. It would irritate any of you. You're being cut off. I was there to do a job, and I had an allotted time. They broke the agreement. I stood at the microphone, got angry, much angrier than I would get nowadays, and I proceeded to say, I have 15 minutes, I won't do justice to what happened to me, so I'm going to tell you my opinion of modern ufology. What I did got me banned from speaking at MUFON for years, according to Walt Andrews, who wants to be friends now. That's okay, nice guy. But I am very critical. I was very critical at the time. Again, too much division, too much backstabbing. You're all your own worst enemies as far as researchers go. And you don't know who the enemy is. You all have opinions, that's fine, man, but unity has got to be there. An organization like MUFON, who stood for bringing down the wall of secrecy, stopping that bad old government from covering up UFO information, was doing the same thing by censoring me. And they censored me because at that time, official policy for MUFON was that alien beings will not be discussed in official MUFON business. Only UFOs, only technology, not life forms. I broke those rules. and they retracted, and that's where it happened. Luckily enough, a good light on that weekend was that I met this guy. I didn't meet him. I was watching this panel of abductees speaking, and Whitley Strieber was there fighting with Philip Klass, which was hilarious. You should have seen it. And this one guy, and there was this voice of sanity. Everyone was arguing, and I'm the same abducting things that go on. And this one voice about a guy talking about his experience with his sister when he's young. And I'm at the door listening, and this English guy came up to me as I'm listening to this person who's sitting there, and says to me, he was drunk, actually, and nothing against anyone in England, he just happened to be English. He said, "You Yanks saw a Harrier jump jet," and I can't tell you what I said to him. They just had 2 cents. But anyway, this guy's talking and talking and talking, and I immediately said, I'm going to corner this guy, man. I need someone like him for this book. He sounded very bright, very articulate, and intelligent, and I didn't know who the hell he was. Apparently, we'd met some years earlier, but, Anyway, the next day I did meet him in the hallway, I think. I just finished arguing that MUFON should pay me the fee they promised me, and they didn't want to do that either, and I threatened violence, and they did. It was $30, folks. It was my entrance fee. I got it back. That was all it was, big bucks. And Peter and I got together, and we said, hey, let's meet in New York City, and I had a motive. He just said, oh, good, I'm going to be able to talk to this Bentwaters guy and do my thing, whatever. Had no idea what my motives were. And I know this is disjointed. I do not go off a speech, but I'm trying to say is that now we're going to segue into Peter and I, and we dance and balance clown and all that. It's great. But now Peter can come back. Ouch.
I don't want to come back.
Yeah, how's everyone feeling? Because I know it's tough to listen to a talking head, isn't it? It really is. Do we want to stand up and jump around and go crazy for a while?
Is there any way we can get
You
this
see me on a Friday night. Pardon me?
Yeah.
Yeah, can we get a window open?
Can you push the bar on the doors, Larry? Get them all locked up, Tom.
We appreciate that this is not your usual presentation, and it can be exhausting, even when you're sitting down, to have a blast furnace aimed at you like my dear partner here. First, I just want to say for anybody who's standing, we apologize for the problem with the chairs. And I do see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or so, 6 chairs up front. If you want to take a moment and take a seat.
We're better looking from a distance, though, just to warn you.
Stay back. The other thing is that it's now about 7:30. We're scheduled for a break in about 10 to 15 minutes. And I thought maybe right now, if it's okay with you and everybody here, why not just pause for a moment and take some interim questions before maybe some of you lose a train of thought, because we're going to be persevering on after the break. So, questions?
I heard a rumour that the atom bombs have been affected in some way in the base. Was that true?
Repeat the question. I'll repeat it. This gentleman in the front has said that he heard a rumor, which we're going to get into later. It's a good time to get into it. Thank you. That atom bombs, which are actually nuclear bombs for the modern age, were adversely affected on the base. I would have known this in 1980, but when we interviewed with Colonel Holt, and unfortunately I have to kind of put this in perspective, an issue of Omni has come out in the States since we've been here in England. And we were going to be in the issue, and it was going to be a complete trashing of me, particularly. Groundless. I mean, there was nothing I was worried about, but not what's new, right? But the next thing that happened is that they got a hold of Colonel Holt to do this interview. And the interview was very, I'm going to set this up while I'm going to tell you about the nukes here. Holt decided to go through a very disjointed account, barely an account, but it was more of a focus on one of the witnesses is spreading disinformation. Now, we thought we had a good relationship with this man. We've been nothing but honorable. So, therefore, that tells me that I have complete permission to talk about in public what he made us turn the tape recorders off in Washington, D.C. last year, with Bob Exler, the researcher, was with us too. The Colonel Holt told us a number of key things that he wanted us to shut it down, told things about me. He confirmed the interest of the National Security Agency in me. He was frightened for his life. A lot of things I'm not making fun of, but a very frightened guy. He also let us know that on those nights, he said, are you aware that these objects, when they shot their beams of light down to the ground, not only were they harmless shots down out in the farmer's field, but out on over Woodbridge Base, they fired, you saw the nuclear weapon storage areas with the earth-covered mounds. That's where they hid the bombs. These things shot, we had sensors and alarms. They shot the beams down, they penetrated the earth-covered mounds. The beam somehow affected the weapons stored within. They rendered them useless, I don't know how many. And as Chuck DeCaro said from CNN, he said the way to find information on this event is not the UFO paper trail, because you're not going to find one. There is one, but we won't find it. There's photographs and films, they exist. This has been verified by senior people above me. I was just the first to say it was filmed. That is an element that should be followed up. That's an element where your Ministry of Defense, Mr. Hazeltine, saying that this event posed no threat to national security here in Great Britain is an outright lie, because if a nuclear accident or a near accident is going to happen, no matter what the cause, that's a threat. But because it involves so many elements, we had apparently a near Holocaust down there that night. Question? Figure. Question? Yes, sir.
Why do you think governments want to cover this up so much?
Well, that is one of the big questions. Why do we think governments want to cover this up so much? We can't absolutely tell you why, but we certainly can make some very good educated guesses. I'll give you a couple of mine. One is that admitting that whatever you want to call them, extraterrestrial or interdimensional beings, come and go with impunity in this plane, in our world, means, for starters, at the very least, that, well, I'll use our American president. If President Clinton were to go forward tomorrow night on American television and say, since 1947, our government, intelligence, and military have been aware of this situation, it means, number one, a tacit admission that every American president, since and including Harry Truman, has been an absolute conspirator in keeping this silent. Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, whatever their predisposition, it doesn't matter. It would set in motion a political scandal, the likes of which would make something like Watergate look like a cupcake. That's almost on the lowest level. Number two, it would imply that technology exists that we can't even conceive of. It might cause a crash in the petrochemical industry and the stock market. I was going to say the coal industry in England, but that's already a moot point. Here's another thing. Among whatever our background, whether it's secular or religious, if we are, we're all aware of fundamentalists in communities, whether they're Christian, whether they're extreme Jewish fundamentalists. I grew up in a very liberal Jewish family in New York, or whether they're Islamic. They are fundamentalist. Only God can be interpreted as I see it. My holy book is right. Every detail in it is literal. It's not a mixture of, stories, allegories. So let's think back a bit. If this opens up, if this can of worms is popped, I think it will quickly be dismissed that, well, it only started in 1947. Immediately the time frame is wide open. The best example on a scholarly level are the works of Zecharia Sitchin, one of 200 living acknowledged first-generation Sumerian scholars, who has translated pre-biblical works literally as extraterrestrial interventions. This is not an Eric von Däniken who was theorizing and did some good popularizing, but he was basically a cult figure. Now, let's just say that I'm a fundamentalist Jewish or Christian person. I'm more familiar with the Old and New Testament than I am with the Koran, although I've read a fair amount of it out of my own curiosity. And I go to one of the many stories that I know happened, it's a literal thing, Ezekiel. I've gone through at one point, just as an intellectual sort of test, 10 different translations of the Old Testament, lined them up, borrowed some, had some. Ezekiel, he's a shepherd. He's out on the desert plains with some grass and sheep, and lo, unto him comes a wheel within a wheel out of the sky, of the appearance of burnished beryllium with eyes all around. All the translations are almost perfect variations of this. Ezekiel is not seeing an angel. He is seeing a circular metal thing with regularly spaced lights around it. It comes down and it lands in the desert. Disembarking from the thing comes an angel. Go back to the original Sumerian. The word angel is a word you'd hear more often in the halls of government than the halls of church. It means a go-between, an emissary. An angel disembarks. Also, with a covering of the appearance of beryllium, and where the wheel went, the angel went. Well, what we're talking about here is nothing less than fundamentalist religious people having to face the possibility that one of their precious religious truths is a legitimate misinterpretation of an intervention, not by Jehovah, but by visitors from another place. Immediately, we are in an area that we cannot even contemplate as far as the potential for a cultural upset. And on a secular level, we would have to perceive ourselves as not the biggest flea on the back of the cosmic dog, would we? That would upset a lot of scientists, a lot of technically oriented people, a lot of people with degrees. Frankly, you know what I think? I think you and I and Larry and our families, we'd have some sleepless nights. This would be upsetting. I can tell you one thing. Bud and Stanton Friedman are very great about knocking this off. Stanton says he thinks there is a place where bad aliens are forced to go for a while and see how bad things can really be. Maybe where somebody's graduate experiment gone horribly wrong. Maybe they are us a million years in the future. It's all theoretical, but there are very real reasons that a lot of people feel it's best to sit on this. Who wants to be the one to rock the boat? Who would have the courage? They kill presidents, they kill prime ministers, they kill people. I think one of the reasons that we're still walking around with impunity is because, who's going to believe us? We're two schnooks working on a book for 6.5 years on nickel and dime kind of situation. One schnook and, Larry. We can joke about it, we have to joke about it. And before we go to a break, just to underscore it, we'll underscore it again, this is not about aliens. It's not about, whatever we think is happening. Something is going on, it's very real, and we're people. We're men, we're women, we're English, we're American, it doesn't matter. Race, religion, our subjects aside. If this was taken seriously, it would have a very interesting side effect. It would mean that all of us in this room, the people we speak to in the States, our friends, our relatives, might begin to see themselves as people, as citizens of this planet, which would be very detrimental to drawing the lines in the dirt, to keeping power politics in gear, to keeping the whole jingoistic insanity of nationalisms and people pitted against each other. A lot of reasons. One more question before we go to break? Yes, ma'am.
If I can ask you about your experience with your sister. When I was a child, funny enough, in Suffolk, only 10 miles away from Bentwaters.
Really?
Yeah, just outside Ipswich.
I can hear your locals.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And terrified to hear what you said about the bunkers. It was something we've always suspected locally.
Yeah.
Just to think that those
You should
things were
know.
there. Oh, God, it's just scary. Anyway, when I was 10, I was with a group of friends. There was about 11 of us playing outside. It was dusk, but the light was very good.
Hold one second. Can everybody hear her back there?
No,
Why, really stand up and give it to them too, because...
when I was about 10 years old.
Oh, great. Let's get that.
Feedback like that. When I was about 10 years old, living about 10 miles away from Bentwaters base actually, and I knew Rendlesham Forest very well. It was so interesting to hear your description of those particular craft. As I say, when I was 10, I was out playing with some friends. It was dusk, but the light was very, very good, very clear. And one of my friends said, "Look," and we looked up, and 3 craft, brushed aluminium, I couldn't see any markings on them, but brushed aluminium, came over in an arc. And the question I wanted to ask you was, when they went, did they go away in an arc, or did they just sort of go think like that in a straight line? Because we were stood there, and again, it was in a triangular formation, 3 craft. The one at the front seemed to be a little bit bigger than the 2 at the back, but that may be a poor memory. And they just came directly above us. There wasn't any buildings nearby or anything. They were directly above us, and we just stood transfixed. I have no idea how long they were there. It could have only been a matter of 30 seconds or so. I haven't got a clue. And we stood, and then they just shot away in an arc. They just went in a curve over some houses. And we just sort of stood and looked at each other, and we basically ran home. All of us just ran home. And I knocked on the door and I said, "Mum, I've seen something really, really strange." And you know, she thought usual, you know, childish pranks. But as you said, parents know when you're lying or not. Literally up the road from where I lived was a very large radar tracking station, which I think was part of the early warning system there. Literally just a couple of miles up the road from us. And my uncle was actually wing commander at Rendlesham. And she rang him to say, you know, your niece has seen this thing, can you find anything out about it for us? And the line went dead. it just stopped. And he came round to see us a couple of days later, and he sat and talked to me. He said, "Well, you know what it's like when you're out playing, you know, the light was funny." And he was just trying to tell me, you're imagining it. But the direction that was coming from him was, just shut up, basically, just be quiet. I've never forgotten it. It's just such a relief to hear you describing the same sort of thing, to know you're not a complete lunatic.
Could you say what year that was?
Yes, it was 19... Let's think, when was it? I was 10, so it was 1980.
We're going to talk after this, sir.
Sorry, 1970.
I'm not going to fully answer your question right now. I will say that when they disappeared, I was unconscious. My sister saw them finally disappear, and what we're going to do is, even if it's a half an hour at the very end of this, I'll come back and talk a bit about what I do with Bud Hopkins, about what I do remember about that, some of what my sister remembers, and thank you very much. Let us take a break now, 15, 20 minutes. As long as you let us have a cup of tea, we'll be happy to.
And counting. 99 bottles of beer on the wall. Remember that song? I don't know if that was it. As you're all sitting down, we really, I'll say it for Peter and myself, it takes an awful lot to get up on a Sunday night and come out to see anything, let alone a UFO talk. And this is a high point. You might not believe this, but a very high point in not only my life, but his. You are some of the most receptive people I have encountered in 13 years of this. And it's an honor for me to speak to you and to share this with you. And I look forward to our return when we've got boxes of books to sign. And we love you all, really. You have a right to know that. I'm thrilled. I'm speaking.
We're just waiting from the sign from Tom, our technician, a very wonderful technician, to tell us that we're ready to roll again. Okay, before Larry picks up, let me just take 30 seconds and say, I tend to go on and on with answers. I'm going to try and keep myself clipped here a bit. We have a tremendous amount of material we still want to share with you. We're not going to nearly cover it all. Our manuscript right now is coming in at over 700 pages, and it reads like a novel. But your turn.
We try to avoid being melodramatic a lot of times when you present this information, because you just get attacked for it. But I've been asked some very interesting questions by people during the break, and I'd like to answer them now. First of all, we were asked if there was any follow-up with the people in the farmer's house you saw in the field, where I had said that there were lights on in the house. Well, we've never done the follow-up, but I have to credit Jenny Randalls with this. And you can read that in her book, Out of the Blue. And I don't think Sky Crash got into that at the time. But the original farmer was relocated to southern England. He was bought out by the Department of Defense. The cows that I had seen in the field, actually through Jenny's work, it was determined that those cows ran out into the nearby road. If you ever go to this site, you'll find that there is population nearby. And there's a lot of locals that did see things. The cows ran out and were hit by a taxi. And the farmer went for compensation to the Air Force, and that's how they compensated him. They didn't kill him, that they bought him out and got rid of him. Now the people living there simply wonder why all these people are running around in their pasture all the time with cameras. So that's the best I know on the farmer. And I don't know his name. Jenny Randles would be one to contact and see. We should have done that by now, but who's perfect? The other question is one that I get a little embarrassed with, but no less, it's an issue. It's certainly an issue with people close to me, close to Peter. We know that, again, our perceptions on certain things could be wrong. That's why we present this, so people in the know, or know more than us, will let us know. And we would alter radically anything we say. We're trying to learn and get to the bottom of this problem, just like all of you. I know no more than the rest of you. It's just a series of events. I've been asked about our concerns for our safety. In America, we have presidents, of course, we all know that, and we've had a series of rather embarrassing presidents for about the last 30 years or so. But unfortunately, something in our country, and I'm going to say this very quick, I'm not going to preach, but in the United States, we had President Kennedy, and I was very, very young when he was around, but I can remember the image of Kennedy's face on television when I was a kid, and it did kind of reach out to you. You know, as a child, it seemed like a friendly person, someone to trust, and no matter if he went in closets with Marilyn Monroe, I certainly would have. Who can blame the guy? Early Marilyn, but he, sadly in our country, and I love my country, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. We have as many problems you guys do here, we're just a lot bigger, size-wise, and we have all the domestic problems in the family and in society and in the towns and everything. We're no better in America, we just have more land to run around and go crazy in. That's about all there is. We're a new country, we don't have nearly the history you do, but we have a very rapid, fast, condensed history over the last 200 years if you study it. And a lot of Americans now are losing touch, it seems, with our history. It seems to be falling apart. My partner and I's belief is that in November 1963, President Kennedy was killed as a result of a coup d'etat within our government. Oliver Stone, who is aware of why we're here also, a friend of ours was a chief researcher on the film JFK, and in fact that film was based, contrary to what the press in my country said about it, on fact. But that is a vast thing. I believe the people that keep the information quiet on Mr. Kennedy's assassination control the information on UFOs also. They're not people with your good intentions and heart. I'm asked about our safety a lot. What do we think about it? And I'm always, heck with that, you know. But my family has always been concerned. They don't tell me, but through roundabout ways I find that out. I've always been kind of a magnet for very strange, unsavory situations sometimes in my life. Peter's family feels the same way. But, and not to sound like Joan of Warren or something, but if you do something in life, I think the only issue I'd have in here to worry about nowadays is divulging nuclear information. But I think it's important in the whole scope of the story. If you only have part of the story, you're not getting the whole story, therefore the confusion comes. I think if anything were to happen to me, though I don't think I could die under natural causes now and not have people say it was, oh, they got him. But I do believe that if either of us, and I don't know if you feel the same way, if you do anything in life, whether it's missionary work or...
Thank you, Professor Freud.
I had a friend that was a mercenary, actually. I really did. Who went through these events and became a mercenary. That's another story. But then a born-again Christian. But life in America. But honestly, and it sounds dramatic, and I don't know if a gun was put to my head and someone fired it in a crowd or whatever. You know, I don't see that ever happening. But if I were to perish from this very short life that we all live, and the older you get, and I know there's some young people here, and do enjoy your life now, because it gets very confusing once you start paying taxes and things. I don't think that dying for something you believe in is all that bad. A lot of people go through life and feel very disappointed at the end of it that they maybe didn't leave a mark or accomplish something. And if I'm not going to cure AIDS or cancer or the homeless situation that's rampant and all over the world, but I might be able to do something in this area, and hopefully one piece of the puzzle more, being as honest as I can, to get this out. And if I died because of that reason, or if Peter did, or both of us, I don't think that would be dishonorable. I think hopefully it would have been toward us leaving a mark here, and other people would pick up and just continue. I know my mother would sure be a force to contend with if our government did something to us.
Both of our mothers have a nuclear capacity.
Both of our mothers. And so yeah, it's a thought. My girlfriend thinks I'm very cocky, and a lot of times when I go over here, she gets worried. And, you know, I'm gone a month now, and she says, you know, she goes, they can take out a president, you're no one. And, you know, many things can happen, but you don't worry about that in life, and I don't foresee that at all happening. They rely, really, there's many people that just don't have to be killed. What they do in this phenomenon is they rely on you people being so stupid, in America and here. Stupid. They are so out of touch. It's like Hollywood makes a movie and about the average family who has this giant house, 50 cars, no bathrooms, and you know, it's just not in touch with how the real people live in my country and yours. You know, we all work for a living, and so we press on, and not to preach, but that's the last thing I'm worried about. I just want to do the right thing and get the most information to you people so you can take up the fight too, because we need all your help. And that's it. Let's move on with the rest of the story.
Okay. In June of 1987, Larry and I met in Washington, D.C. I did not know he was looking for someone to work on this book with. I was just fascinated because this was seemingly an absolutely authentic witness to a military UFO situation. They do not come forward, folks. And the idea that he had, you know, chatted me up a bit in the hallway and that we seemed to have the basis for some kind of friendship made me feel that, well, maybe I could do an interview with him. Literally, that was my intention, to get a good interview with him, and I posed it to him, and he said, sure, you know, whenever. We spoke, we left Washington, we spoke during the week, he living in Connecticut with his wife, I living in New York City. At the time I had a really quite a nice apartment around the corner from the United Nations, very upscale little part of the city. And he came to Manhattan the following weekend. And you know how it is sometimes with a new friendship or something, it's just sort of marathon talking. We went out to dinner and, you know, wherever we were at night when he crashed on my couch, I went to sleep, we get up, continued over breakfast, etc. By late Sunday afternoon, he posed the question to me. I'm going to work on a book on this. I've started already, I've got an idea, I've got a title for the book. He had the title, and we still have the title. It's Left at East Gate. Has two meanings. I think very linearly, so it was only last year or so he pointed out that there was a second meaning, and I was quite taken aback that I have such a narrow focus sometimes. Left at East Gate was essentially the command that these men were given to make a left turn after passing the East Gate of RAF Woodbridge and head into the Twilight Zone there, but you might say he was left at East Gate. Anyway, I agreed. I was going to do this, and I was excited. I really was looking for a serious project to get my teeth into. I had published some articles. Neither one of us are shy in front of crowds. It's very easy for me to get up in front of 500 people and talk. Sometimes one-to-one is more difficult. Anyway, for the next 6.5, 7 months, I became an absolute armchair researcher. I had some money in the bank. I took time off. I supported myself on my savings. He came over shortly after with a huge amount of reading for me. He had obviously collected everything that had ever been published on this. He gave me his copy of Sky Crash. I started to dig into the archives. I only lived half a dozen blocks from one of the finest research facilities in the United States, which is our main branch of the New York City Public Library. A building so beautiful, it looks like it belongs here. Anyway, I started to dig, and I found some fabulous materials, but it was all armchair stuff. Winter finally rolls around. It's December, early January. Larry gives me a call. It comes in. He says, you know, you probably know right now as much as any civilian in the United States on this topic. And we could, Right now, you could write up your part of the book in New York, I could write up my part in Connecticut. We put them together, we've got a book. But I have got to take you back there. It just is a strange little corner of the world. It feels strange. UFO situations continue to go on there. I knew that from my studies in the area. It is an area where there's always been high incidence in modern times of secret developments. Radar was developed a few miles away from where this happened in World War II. Our American spy planes were first put into this position in Britain, the U-2 and our SR-71A Blackbird. It's just a high security area. There are legitimate ghost sightings, gravity anomalies, ley convergences, etc. And I'm an Anglophile. The chance to go to England, well, look like a more serious person. We'll go someplace where something once happened, take some pictures of a field, have some labels under it. Oh, sounds good to me. And on February 17th, 1988, we embarked on a trip to Suffolk. We come into Woodbridge finally, and we first spend the night in London, next day get to Woodbridge, A10 flies over, here I am, it's exciting. Larry hits the English phone system. I had no idea how to use your marvelous telephones. And after a while turns up a bed and breakfast in an ideal location, not more than 1.25 miles from the entrance to RAF Woodbridge, 4 or 5 miles from the site of the incident. Great. We get there. Marvelous couple. Go up to our room. Here we are in England. I'm unpacking. Larry's a little moody. He withdraws a bit. And geez, that was easy to understand. I have to say the morning before began, that morning began in London, turning on the radio with a report of UFOs in the Midlands. And I looked at Larry and said, we blanking need this? It was, a little running nervous joke. And it was a police officer who had made the observation, but it was somewhat ominous. Anyway, I check my equipment and we start to chat again. I start to interrogate him. He had given me permission to pry into every area of his life. And you can be damn sure I was doing just that.
I wanted him to, first of all, another thing I told you is at the beginning, no matter what, we became friends. A lot of people that work in a partnership sometimes do not. But I told him, I said, if you find anything wrong with what I've said in my private life, any kind of thing, and with the story, inconsistency, you publish it, no matter what. You have your end to do, I have mine, and we'll see how it looks at the end. And just so you know.
Interesting opportunity. The book might turn out very dissonant. He's going to say, this happened to me and it's the truth, and I turn up something that would say, the guy's a liar, folks. And that was our agreement, and I was challenged, so I continued. Couldn't catch him up on anything, but I did occasionally get him rather angry. As you might imagine, the guy has a temper. And you asked me that 8 times already. Well, I was doing it again. Anyway, it's dusk now. My dream is, here we are in this charming house from 1820 with the beautiful Tudor brickwork. I am going to have a wonderful English dinner. We're going to watch some English television. We're going to get to sleep early, get up in the morning, go out and get to work. Larry goes to the window, looks out the window. There's the Rendlesham forest right out the window. And he says, quote unquote, so, you want to go out there tonight? The mind flashes. No, I don't want to go out there tonight. It's dark, it's scary. He had to tell me it was like the night that it happened. Ambient, no ambient light, no moon, temperate. But a 1.5 seconds later said, sure, we were there to work, and that's what he was suggesting we get to. Pack up, which meant for me, tape recorder in each pocket. In fact, this dear little artifact was one of them. Flashlights, bundle up, and out we go down the proverbial dark country road, heading toward the Bentwaters base. I know in the States, bases are closed. You don't go on them. Our agreements with our European allies in NATO is that parts of the base are open to the public. Certainly the residential, non-restricted parts, and we would be able to walk on, and he was going to give me a walking tour of the places I already knew so well in my head. Well, we are now, I have to say, maybe 200 yards from the gate of RAF Bentwaters. Something shoots over our heads. And, well, it's a shooting star, right? Except that it stops. And it starts to pulsate. And it changes colors a few times, and it zigzags and takes off and disappears. Well, I'm a good observer. I've trained myself. I'm, again, painter and a film historian. I'm very visual.
And I trained myself to be a writer. You're just making pictures with words. And I take the tape recorder and do what I consider is a fairly accurate account of what I'm seeing, except that the recording sounded something like, oh my God, 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 etc. I was horrified. Who needs to see a UFO near RAF Bentwaters on our first night on location with him? This is not good for me. I have a reputation. This is bad. Well, we head on to the base. And it is a walk down memory lane for Larry. This is where this happened. This is where I live. This is where he points in the window of the mess hall, the table that he and the other security cops sat at when they came back, you know, early the next morning. It's quite amazing. We enter a base Burger King, which was very surreal. It's a Burger King, and there it is. Everybody's Air Force men, women, Air Force children, you know, civilian uniforms. We ordered 2 burgers. I didn't have any American money. He had enough for us to get 2. Yeah, he's a good observer. And he spots a guy across the room, flash on the shoulder, hulky Midwestern kid, it turned out, nice kid. He said, that's me 8 years ago. I'm gonna chat him up. Brings him back to the table. One thing leads to another. The kid makes it very clear, without any prompting, that the biggest story still for these people is what happened to Larry and these guys. Larry says to him, it was real, I was involved, it happened. The kid goes white. He says, I'd like to talk to you. Out we go. 40 minutes of interesting conversation follow, most of which I record, most of which is taped in the book. Well, it's an exciting first night, right? I mean, this is a terrific start for a week on location. 9 o'clock, we say our goodbyes to Airman Mike, and down the road we go. Everybody see American Werewolf in London? Remember the line, don't go on the moors tonight, boys? This was that night. And we're paralleling the road. There's nothing what we would call in the States a soft shoulder, where you can kind of veer off to the side of the car.
They live here, they know.
Yep. We cut into a field, head in about 50 feet, and start paralleling the road with the Rendlesham forest to the left. We're off base now, and at 9:30 exactly by my watch, I see an erratic light over the trees, and I say, Larry, do you see that? Recorder's on, with God as my witness. For the next hour and a half, we had another Bentwaters incident. Multiple UFO sightings coming and going. We saw small star-shaped things zigzagging through the sky. We saw fully articulated, brightly lit discs, and I have to stress there is no sound involved in any of these, coming in over the forest, dropping into the forest, lighting up the forest. Green fireballs like, you know,
heard these stories of green fireballs over here? We saw them.
Moving and maneuvering around trees at a certain point in an area we know is nothing but woods. And we know it because we've been back a number of times since. A wall of light came up that I can only describe if you took the light-alls, the military equivalent of the Hollywood Klieg lights they use at premieres, and aimed 150 of them straight up at the sky in a line, from very bright to unbelievably bright. It looked like a city had exploded in there. We're recording all of this as it's happening. I know I am going somewhat in and out of physiological shock. I don't mean that as a figure of speech. That's adrenaline dump, epinephrine dump, tunnel vision, auditory exclusion. If somebody shot a .45 caliber pistol off 10 feet away, I probably would not have flinched. I could hardly believe what was going on. And who am I with? Mr. Number One witness in the country, right? This is going to be a disaster. How can I write about this? But it's real and it's happening.
I was angry. I felt that as we're standing just like this, too. And this was like the new model year, all the new vehicles from Venus being displayed for us at a car show.
And it gets better. At a certain point, not that far in front of us, you know, maybe a little farther than the wall, I don't know exactly, something either landed in or appeared in the field.
Indeed.
You'll see a brief sketch of it when we get to the slides, which will run very quickly. There aren't many of them. It had 3, what I can only describe as glowing windows on it that arced down and gave off enough ambient light to realize that they were set into a metallic framework. There was nothing out there.
He tries to rationalize, you know, he's consummate. I was actually trying to do that too. He stood there going, it's this, it's that, and I could see him start to really go downhill because he couldn't grasp on to what he was seeing, nor could I. It was...
I'm saying, Larry, I see articulated movement in front of the thing. Larry's saying, there are beings out there. Hello, you know, what do you want?
There was something that came away from this thing and was just moving toward us, and you could see, not, you know, clearly, but you could see their shapes. You could hear the movement of the brush. Now, this sounds totally unbelievable. Had we had cameras, we would have had amazing pictures, maybe.
Who would have thought about
But we recorded everything, and there was we're making jokes,
Very nervous
one-liners
jokes.
from Woody Allen
Very
movies.
nervous jokes. And
Peter
chain
goes,
smoking.
this isn't a good
Chain
night for a
smoking.
trip to Mars. and
I was
all
terrified
this.
at that moment because Larry got angry and started walking toward this thing saying, God damn it, this always happens to me, why don't you leave me alone? I ran up behind him and I grabbed his shoulder and I said, please stop. At that moment, and we also had 2 Air Force military vehicles pull up, and we're watching this 100 yards away. We knew it was Air Force vehicles because it was on the perimeter road at the base. They were watching it. At that moment, I don't know whether I was more afraid of being grabbed by Air Force Office of Special Investigation or the guards and interrogated, never seeing my family again, or being abducted by aliens. It was one of those moments. Well, we watched for an hour and a half, and we continued to walk parallel to the field. It was 11 o'clock, and it was still going on. We were that exhausted. We were still suffering from jet lag. And we walked back into the village and go to sleep.
This phenomena that we were witnessing stretched for about 1.25 miles.
Yeah,
I mean, you could not have missed
It
it.
just kept going as we were walking. At wherever point we were looking off into the woods, there was an aspect of it.
Yeah.
Probably added 6 months extra to the book because you will have a full, the cleanest transcription imaginable of what this was, because I know we're going to get attacked on this one. So I worked syllable by syllable in putting this together for you readers. And, you know, it just forms part of the fabric of what went on for us.
Now, the sad point here is that now I'm saying part of me is going, thank God. I was very calm for a lot of it. Then I got angry and I did want to go out and just beat up these things or whatever. He, on the other hand, was starting to, I could see just this distance, this gap. I thought, he's done. He's out of this thing. And myself, in the middle of this, my marriage is collapsing back in the States, and I'm like, oh my God, this project has collapsed. This is amazing. But Peter made a statement. He goes, how can this happen and no one around here see this or notice it? Which is to the contrary, as our friend from Suffolk has said, they do know. We finished up this trip, we did the research we had to do, you'll see photos. Another story within this is the destruction of Rendlesham Forest in October of 1987. When I was on RAF Bentwaters, now we're going to stretch some of your imagination, but you got to do some of your own homework too. The book will best illustrate what we're trying to say. When I was on the base back in 1980 and 81, there was a gigantic series of equipment that I was told somehow could alter weather in the case of adverse weather conditions. They could open windows literally in cloud canopies and the aircraft could go out. These are stories, and they were hooked to water and the whole bit. Some years later, with Bud Hopkins and Antonio Jimenez, we were speaking at Princeton, near Princeton and New Jersey, and Peter showed me this picture of something Wilhelm Reich used to, or developed, I guess, called a cloud buster. Now, I knew nothing of that discipline or anything, but we had things like 4 times the size of the biggest one in that pamphlet, that looked just like it. They're these long sticks. It's a whole other area of research or something. But anyway, we were told by our friends in Suffolk that during the day of the storm,
October 19th, 1987.
the Royal Army had tree clearing equipment all along the roads. There was no forewarning of storms coming in, anything, but thousands of deer gathered in open areas also. Within 3 hours that night, this place, you will see a representation of this destruction that we have gotten gas from people, which is all cleared now. I was back in 1985, I took my wife there on my honeymoon, my ex-wife, and you're obsessed, you know, you have to go back. And she wasn't laughing, she wanted to go to Bermuda. We took a picture in one area and the canopy was there, and you'll see this. Well, we took a picture from the same spot on this road later on, and you'll see this. But we get back to the States, and
just digress
yeah,
on
go
one
ahead.
thing. The third day we're there, we finally walk out to this field where you now have been. It's called Capel Green. It's a farmer's field. You know that feeling you're going on a holiday, you've got the guidebook, you've studied up, you're in India, all of a sudden there's the Taj Mahal. I know this place. I've seen pictures of it since I was a kid. I know this field. I know where the farmhouse is going to be. I know where the stand of trees is going to be. We come over the rise, and Larry's hand is also, this was my notebook. It's all recorded as it happens. His hand snaps out as we hit this rise, and he goes, it sat there. And on the tape, it's quiet. He says, but of course, it's a coincidence that that area that I'm pointing at is vaguely discolored and circular. Well, you know, in UFO studies, anybody that has a familiarity, there are specialty areas. One is what we call trace cases. One researcher, I think he's based in Australia, has computer log entries of over 1,600 cases where soil or where a thing sat have been chemically altered. It's not a new phenomenon. But 8.5 years in a farmer's field, that there's still a mark there, well, it can't be. 10 minutes later, we're talking about it again. I'm going along the edge of the field squinting. You know, maybe it's the way the lights are hitting the clods, it's been plowed. I go out there, I don't have containers, I have 2 film canisters. Take one from ground zero, walk 50 feet, take another. When we get back to our friend's house, Larry goes in, I go into the yard, get some water. It's not absolutely scientific, but I mix some of the regular field soil with water in an exact amount. It becomes good English mud. The other thing, it's like dirt that's floating, it's weird, it won't rejoin with the water right, I have to smash it up, it looks different, the color is different, it feels different. As a wonderful old man once said to me in Oklahoma, sometimes if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, and you cook it up and it tastes like a duck, it might be a duck. Well, this soil has been taken now in professional amounts and analyzed by a distinguished laboratory in Massachusetts. And there are some profound differences here. So that is just another one of the things that happened that'll be published.
It's major. And another thing, just because you're going to see something, medical records from my Air Force days. And how I got them is that I stole them, because I knew they wouldn't exist when I got out. And I told Colonel Holt that. But the funny thing is as time went on, after I became a civilian, I started to have medical anomalies. I would hemorrhage through the skin, a lot of things. And if anyone's in medicine here, this was very bizarre. My ex-wife was in medicine, and after a few episodes of this covering shirts with blood and eye problems and everything, I went to the hospital, had extensive blood work done. This is documented. And 4 doctors came in to me. My wife was sitting to my right, and they said, "Were you ever in Vietnam?" And I thought, "I'm too young." "Were you in the military?" "Yes." "Were you ever exposed to a nuclear element?" And I said, "Possibly." And they said, "You were showing signs," and I've talked to other witnesses to these events. There is unity on most of the areas. Other areas, perceptual problems. We have all suffered things from enlarged hearts, severe eye problems, and radioactive exposure. And the darndest thing is, he said, I was showing effects of exposure to a nuclear element that shouldn't be seen for 20 years. I was showing them in 4 years. That was in 1984. As you'll see, the actual documentation from my eyes, which were really flash burned, I wasn't the only one, after these events, that light explosion where the object is there, that hurt my eyes and many others. If I'm under lights like this, I'm gone in a while. I can barely even see beyond 5 rows. And you'll see the documentation where it was the optical retina clinic at RAF Lakenheath, where they did extensive work and determined that I had burns to the retinas of my eyes just within days of the event in the forest. And also another thing is I tried to get my military records early in the 80s, and this is all in the book. It's very hard to give you all this information right now without falling off track. But I was informed, and this is verified, that my records are with the NSA. To see them, I'd have to bring lawyers to Washington, D.C., meet a board of eligibility, and there would be no guarantee that I still could see them. And this is still in effect to this day. My records should be kept in an archive in St. Louis, Missouri, where even back to the Revolutionary War, all the veterans from our side is still stored there. And mine are not, along with others. They are still secured. And this is totally documented. Why? We come back to the States, and Peter and I's relationship basically disintegrated immediately. It was slowly coming. My marriage disintegrated, which was my primary concern. I lost interest in this whole project. I don't imagine you might have too.
I didn't lose interest in the project, I just got scared. I was hearing very funny clicks and taps on my phone and immediately said, well, this is absurd. It's New York Telephone. It's a very complex system, and anyway, the purpose of tapping a phone, if that's what my romantic, silly mind, oh, I'm a UFO researcher, my phone's being tapped. Please, don't bore myself. But, you know, meddling with phones has 2 purposes. One is the obvious, to get information surreptitiously. The other is to unnerve the party. All right, I dismissed it. But then my mail was coming and occasionally being opened and officially resealed, which I'd like to, just digress for a moment and say that our friends, our main contacts in Suffolk, when I send them mail, it is now routinely opened and officially resealed in this country.
Intercepted.
The last thing I sent them in October was a letter. It contained a cassette of a talk I had done that had nothing to do with Bentwaters at a conference in the States. And that cassette had been removed, and you don't have to be paranoid to know that someone is following you. So I was frightened. I knew I was into something much bigger than I thought. It was very exciting. Wow, wouldn't it make a great book? But what in the name of God had I gotten myself?
Peter's brought up a good point. I'd just like to throw it at you. You hear in the UFO folklore a lot of people that men in black and government agents came to researchers and threatened me and stole my files and all this, and this may well be true. I'm sure it is. I was a person that they had logical reason to approach, which they did in 1983, and it continued for 4 contacts through 1987, I believe, 86. It was with the National Security Agency. They made no bones about it. First of all, their main interest in coming to me was not a UFO issue, it was a nuclear issue, to see if I had enough of an axe to grind. The bases were still in operation. What was I going to release? In our book, we named these officers of the National Security Agency. They're living people, they exist. As the contacts continued, it deviated more into the UFO area, where it got to a point where they kindly asked me in exchange for certain things, this is witnessed by people, to alter certain elements to the story, to bring it down, whatever. And I refused. That whole scenario is played out in the book very logically, and you'll see its progression. We named these people.
By late 1988, or that summer, I had a teaching job that summer out in Oklahoma teaching painting in a program for children. And I like going out west and teaching. I love traveling, so I often take a job simply because I travel, not because it pays very well. And Larry had called in a few times over the time I was out there, and he said, oh, there's something that, it's not even a big deal, I'll tell you when you get back. And I get back, and what was that you wanted to talk about from Oklahoma? Oh, it's not a big deal. Well, what was it? Well, I was feeling really suicidal last month, and I thought about killing myself. I think I was not only profoundly saddened by the fact that a guy who I considered a friend, although our relationship at the time was on the rocks, had come so close to ending himself. It hurt my professional pride. I don't make a big show of this. In England, everybody knows who and what the Samaritans are. In the States, there are 4 small branches of the Samaritans. I'm a senior Samaritan in the United States. I work as a part-time supervisor and volunteer at our New York office and have for almost 7 years. I'm a pro. I'm trained to spot the situation. I've been dead on, with no pun intended, with more suicidal people than every psychotherapist in New York put together, I am convinced. And it hurt on a number of levels. I realized we had hit a bad point here. But you know what? By the end of the year, something had happened. It's like a virus.
Let me grab
you
that.
You get angry. And I was that angry and back into the project.
You might find it strange because rarely in this phenomena do witnesses like Travis Walton, he's been through a lot privately, but people talk about some failings in their lives or things that have gone wrong. And when we mentioned this, I wasn't running around looking for ways to kill myself. There was, though I did attempt it very loaded one time, and I went to a party later. I'd forgotten I tried. I mean, that's how really goofy I was. I went through this horrible divorce, and I blame this 85% of the reasons for my divorce. And I just saw myself losing everything, I'm saying, for what? And it just got so negative. When you're under the influence, quite often you're going to think of these things. And when I set out with this book, I said, I can make myself look like this upstanding kind of cat and that's never done anything wrong and has no human failings or anything. But I said, heck with that. Let's start a new precedence, because this phenomenon is simply, really, about people. Because these things come and go, and we're just left with each other. That's the bottom line. And I always thought that other people who have been through pain, through this or through anything, might see that, and I do think this will have a happy ending. It's starting to look that way. Some hope, and know they're not alone. Know the downfalls and mistakes I made in blowing the whistle on anything. I don't care what it is. If your company's doing something wrong and you know it, or whatever, I just wanted to show that there's a price to be paid. And it wasn't for dramatic license, but no one had, I never see people being human in this phenomenon. I always see it kind of, we're becoming, we're the aliens, and that isn't the way to go. So we're trying it, and it's not for your sympathies, it's just to show that this is a flesh and blood phenomenon.
Anyway, at this point, we're up to early 1989, but let's hold for a moment, spend a few minutes going through these slides. Some of them are a little bit redundant, some of them will illustrate some of what we've been saying, and then we'll continue along. So, Omar, when you're ready, can we kill the lights, and then we'll just come right back after. Yeah. I'm going to do some of them. Larry will jump in at the right moments. This is sideways, but it's a map that gives you a general location of the area in question. Everybody turn your head to the left. Capel Green, which is the field that you saw on the video, excuse me, is at top. Okay, next please. Right, this is actually from Sky Crash, this map, and gives you a lay of the land. The top lateral slice is the main land. I'm sorry.
This is where it landed. That's it. We can go to the next one. That's just a drawing, really. Just an indicator for you. That's an aerial view. Oh. That's the field with a dot showing where the event took place. Next one, please. That is me. I mean, at one time there were people saying I was never even in the Air Force. I mean, you hear it all.
He rented that costume.
I did. Peter's backyard tag sale. Tents and you sell all yours. But that was me in Texas, hating the fact I had my hair all cut off. Next one. This is the sign that used to be on the flight line at RAF Bentwaters. That was taken around the time of the events. Just to give you an idea, welcome to the Twilight Zone. Next, please. Well, this is an interesting one. This is, I'll read it for you. It says 81st Security Police Squadron in processing instruction sheet. The events happened to people on D flight. We worked in shifts from A, B, C, and D. D flight worked swings and mids. That was meaning we worked night shift. This is saying that the bus, when it leaves, this is the first thing I got for shift flight assignment. You were assigned to D flight. Your shift commander is Major Ziegler and some other guy. And it just talks about in processing information. So that, you know, that's a record I stole too. Next, please. I'm a thief. That's the badge that we wear in security police. That's the one I actually, that was mine. And I gave it to Peter. And we'll sell it at Sotheby's someday. And this is RAF Bentwaters circa 1981 in the spring. And what you see here are those structures that are rust-colored are actually nuclear, they're said to be, on an engineering standpoint, nuclear-proof structures. So if F-16s that were carrying tactical weapons in the event of nuclear war, the base would have been hit. East Anglia was a first strike capacity. You guys all knew that. I mean, probably Britain would have been annihilated. So we kept planes in there, but that's just irrelevant, but that's what it looked like there. That's,
Defying gravity.
that is. But these are pictures, funny enough, from that era, from that time. I took this picture again in '81, and these are A-10 tank busters, and you remember them from the Gulf War and all that nonsense that we did. And I came up to this fence, and I was a cop too, and the guy came out of there and yelled at me. This would have been a restricted picture, but I ran away with the camera, so you could see it years later. Next, please. This is a picture Peter took in 1988. We called this up here, this corner, this is at the far end of the Bentwaters runway, Commie Corner. And why that was is that the London Communist Party would send people up there in little trucks and they'd take tail numbers off our planes. We couldn't touch them. We'd go by them and they'd do this and we'd do that. Sorry, kids. And it was all in fun, really. You know, we liked communists, really. But we come the thing, and this church was, to make things worse, was they As soon as we get to the base, they say, see that church? No one's there anymore. In 1968, there was a sacrifice there. And then, that was such a kind of welcoming. This is the post. This looks like a pile of horse manure, but actually I was in that the night of the events and called out. It's perimeter post 18, which, well, it's perimeter post 18.
Actually an old pillbox modified.
Just a bunch of dirt with a tarp. This picture was taken the day of the incidents because I went to Ipswich to hang out with some friends. I was pricing Marshall amplifiers. And I couldn't beat these Arab guys down there. Their prices were ridiculous. But this is the main gate. We're in alert condition. I had a camera simply, I wish I had it at the incident. I had it simply for the reason of taking pictures to send them home to my family. But this is the condition we were in that day. It says alert. That's the main gate at Bentwaters. Now it's a ghost town. That's just a close-up of it. Now, a lot of times this is irrelevant, but a lot of people said we went out to the site in jeeps. Well, everyone thinks of the military in jeeps, but actually we had pickup trucks. And this is very much like, this is actually probably the pickup truck itself that we went out to the forest in, riding in the back, and it says security police up here. And this is also the type of vehicle that thing went through the window and the guy kicked the windscreen in, if you remember me telling you that. Just something so you have a perspective on it wasn't jeeps we used there. Next, please.
The warm welcoming sign of the MOD. This is a prohibited place within the meaning of the official Secrets Acts, unauthorized persons, etc., and so forth.
There's a man in this room right now, who I will not name, who literally almost got over that fence and got me that sign to take home a few weeks ago.
Bless his
You won't
heart.
name his, yeah. And he almost did it, I'll tell you. Anyway, next please. It's falling off, you devil.
But thanks, Tom.
Oh. No one's surprised. This is the road pointing down to East Gate. And East Gate is where the first lights were seen on that night. We saw it on the documentary. And Peter took that in 1990, I believe, if it's in color. That's right. Next, please.
Right, February probably 21st, 1988, we come up to this little rise and Larry points out there. This is the photograph that I took while we were recording it. Now, you've seen this on video.
This is not a play of light. This is not a discoloration in the film. This is not an emulsion crack. This is an actual reflection of the discoloration in the field at that time.
And that is the site where the thing sat.
We like to call it ground zero. Next, please. Now, this is an interesting thing, and Jenny Randles is someone to follow. I wish she had been here, because I would have asked her about this specifically. One of the witnesses to the events, you heard me describe the flash of light and then a triangular object. This was drawn by an actual witness to that event, but not me. And this was leaked out through a source. We don't know. Jenny knows about it more than I do. But this witness drew this, and it's obviously been copied many times, but what he's trying to capture is the event I described, but all at one time.
Yeah. This is from Sky Crash.
Is it from Sky? Okay,
Yeah.
it's from Sky Crash.
Oh, hold it.
This happens at every, oh, it's in there. Oh, now I'm a lousy artist, but in Betty Andreasen's living room, I was asked to draw this thing in 1982, and I just drew this rough thing. I never realized that this picture would shoot all over the world in publications from the News of the World, which supposedly interviewed me, but really didn't, but that's okay. And also, and this picture was on Ralph Noyes, the back of a fictional book he did called A Secret Property, which is really kind of a hoot, because there's a crazy Colonel Hoyt on the base.
Out of print, but a wonderful book if you can get hold of it.
Terrific. And it's also, and this is in Japan, where they just went crazy on this. You could tell them you were Jesus, and they'd have you on TV there. But that's on we go. Oh, this is a thing. This was a kid, I believe, a friend of ours, Antonio Huneas, who's a journalist, snapped in Japan. It was sold over in model shops and stuff. kind of chintzy. I hope they didn't charge much, but it's kind of representing the incident, and the aliens, of course, are like 9 feet tall or something, but it's interesting. I don't know. It's just in Japan they love this stuff.
Right. This is the Times of London, December 27th, 1980, documenting the fact that a meteor did shoot over this part of England, and it's probably what was misinterpreted as was later given as an excuse. Now, it is true that a meteor did shoot over, I believe, on the night of the 27th. It's been confirmed by the Royal Astronomy Society or whatever, and the fact is, had you been standing in Capel Green and looking at exactly the right place at the right moment, you would have seen this thing flash over for a maximum of about 5.5 seconds. But this is what these men misinterpreted as that thing.
The end of it actually reads,
Oh, yeah.
after going through everything, the press, of course, and I do say again, they are the enemy, and it's sad because I'm sure there's decent reporters, but they're not allowed to be on these issues. The film Airport 1975 was shown on television on Thursday night, raising public awareness to the possibility of aircraft in trouble. That phrase has nothing to do with the entire article before it. Nothing. They think you're idiots.
Methinks the lady doth protest too much.
It's a lousy movie also. This is the infamous Halt document that through me and the Citizens Against UFO Secrecy and Robert Todd got released in the early 80s. And as it's been said, it does read like science fiction. Who's familiar with this? Give me a hand.
Is anybody familiar with this? Okay, what we are going to do is ask, well, it is actually available in a reprint form in one of the booklets that Tony is selling back there. We're not going to take the time to read it now and to generate more money for Amphora, in fact. But it is freely available in a great deal of UFO literature and lays out a number of the specifics that were reported that night with Halt and the men involved.
But it's a combination of events,
Yeah,
and
compressed
and not accurate, but it's important. This is important. This is a medical dental appointment. This is one of the pieces I stole. What you see obliterated up here in white is my Social Security number, and why we do that in this day and age of fraud. If someone in the audience in America or anywhere saw that and was inclined, they could go ring up charge accounts and everything. And, you know, we're trapped with our social... I don't know what it's like in England, but we have numbers on our heads. This is made out to me, and 81st Security Police up here. The date is 2nd of February, 1981. At the it was on a typing kind of paper, so it was on through that. Optical Retina Clinic, that stands for. Under it, it says burn exposure. The doctor is Eccles, the number is whatever, and the date for it was issued was on 10 January. This is just a week after the event. And this is bring all records and x-rays, full exam, Lake and Heath Eye Ear Clinic, Lake and Heath. But it's an important piece because it showed the beginning. I don't know where the follow-up information is. It's in my files in Maryland somewhere. But just so you might want to see it. That is an interesting picture because the gentleman who, that's me actually, at a change of command ceremony for our wing commander Gordon Williams, who it has been said didn't have involvement in these events, and yet he really did. And he was on the base for about 1.5 years. The average rotation for a senior officer is 2.5 years. They got him out of there real quick. That was the day he made general. I was his bodyguard for that day. So when Colonel Holt has tried to suggest that we mistook Gordon Williams for somebody else, he doesn't realize that we even have the documentation where it lists me as being his bodyguard for that day. I was very familiar with the man, and that's just from that day. That Sergeant Adrian Bustinza you hear about if you read this story or hear about it a lot. We have a statement from him that will be included and left at East Gate. That picture was taken by me in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt in 1981, where we were sent for a month to get us away from the base. And we did nothing but sit around and play cards with these people with towels on their heads and things. No offense, I mean, they played cards.
Adrian stood right next to Larry that night in the field.
He did, even in Egypt. This is Gordon Williams back here, who happened to be caught in this particular picture. This is a big shindig for him leaving. The Air Force guys love to party, I'll tell you. This is Greg Batram, who is involved in this event. He was with me at the phone. He also, you'll see this stands for Vietnam Service. He was a Marine in Vietnam, a weapons systems officer on F-4 Phantoms. His life went kind of screwy with his marriage. He went in the Air Force as an enlisted man, just to do it.
Also kind enough to give us a statement for the book.
He owns one of the largest travel agencies in the western United States now, which is kind of interesting. But that's him and I, just after the events, kind of doing what we like to do. Hated the bow ties, though. This is an important piece now. This is where things get kind of funky. This is request for separation, Airman First Class Lawrence Warren. I was no longer working as a security police officer. I was a cop still, but I was in the back offices, so they could really keep an eye on me. I went to a lawyer, to make a long story short, because I'd made waves. They were making life tough for me, and got this thing ball moving that, due to breach of contract on the Air Force's part, I was eligible for a discharge. My plan was to get out, go back in, and get stationed at another base in a different job. Well, they got me. This is signed by Gordon Williams, his stamp, the commander, who, as a wing commander, would not handle these responsibilities. Not at all. Colonel Holt and people under like that would do that. Anyway, the full colonel and commander of the bases took care of my discharge, personally. And he writes, I approve the honorable discharge of Lawrence B. Warren from the U.S. Air Force to be effective on or about 15 May 1981. I carefully reviewed his application and conclude that the intent of AFR, blah, 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 non-fulfillment of guaranteed enlistment trainee program has been met. Now, I've had a person that knows the codes and all and says, none of this is all chicken feed. None of it makes sense or applies to real codes. Approval of Warren's request to separate from the service is in the best interests of himself and the U.S. Air Force. And I've been flapping my mouth, so if you can read into that, it's interesting. That's just showing his signed stamp or whatever. Well, there's been a lot of people that, again, said, the most hilarious thing I ever read about my military life was that Warren got a honorable discharge he didn't want. Well, I didn't want one of the other ones, this honorable one. So this is the one I did not want, but got. So a lot of people have said I was never in the Air Force. It's a shame you have to go to these lengths to kind of demonstrate things. I had been rebuffed by the, by the Air Force on my attempts to re-enlist. I had a false code, as I've told you earlier, and was finding things very strange that I couldn't get back in. They didn't, for a while, they denied I even served in the Air Force. Very strange. My congressman, the Honorable Gerald B. Solomon, United States Representative in Saratoga Springs, New York, gets this reply from the Department of the Air Force Chief Surgeon General. It says, Dear Mr. Solomon, this is in reply to your letter on behalf of Mr. Lawrence Warren concerning his interest in enlisting in the Air Force. That should say re-enlisting. It's as if I'd never been there before. Authorities in the Office of the Surgeon General, USAF, advised that Mr. Warren was permanently disqualified by the Air Force Air Training Command Squadron on September 17, 1981. That is 5 months after I left the Air Force because of breach of contract on their part. Suddenly, 5 months later, I'm an issue, and they've determined ineligibility. It makes no sense. By reason of congenital partial acquiescence of the blah, 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 blah.
No, let's read this because this is marvelous. Of the radial joint, I can't see it from here. Peripheral, bilateral, now cannot fully extend arm. What this letter is saying is that congenital, bilateral, and involving one arm. Congenital from birth, but yet he was allowed into the service.
It never around firearms would you have been allowed in with this condition. And when I read this letter, I was so frustrated. At the bottom it says, thank you for your interest in Mr. Warren. Be assured his disqualification is for medical reasons and there's no reflection on his character or private service record. Sure. So I took this letter, as you're seeing it here, and I fully extended my right arm and dropped it in the garbage. The next day I retrieved it, and that's why we still have it.
My favorite part of this, though, is that if they're saying it is bilateral, it refers to one arm. I mean, bilateral refers to two arms, yet they discuss it in one arm. It's nonsense.
Doctors would tell you this is completely nonsense. And the funny thing is now you're seeing a little hint of how they try to wear you down. And they try to, someone said, well, you'd be better off in the Air Force, they can keep more tabs on you. In reality, to them, the way they look at it, I'd be more of a threat within that system, because I knew where to look for things, I knew who to talk to. So this is a complete lie, and this is what they do to people like myself. They'll make life very, and they'll do it just blatantly. Next book. Oh, this is UFO lands in Suffolk in the News of the World, and this was an issue of contention I had with some folks over in these parts, because in the States we sent them all the information we could on the events. A gentleman did call me from the News of the World. I was very brief with him, yet he has a very lengthy interview with this Art Wallace, though he knew very well my name was, and it is not accurate at all. We did not know the News of the World was a tabloid paper, and sadly certain people were paid a couple £1,000 for the Hulk document, and thus them using it, and yet we sent it as a courtesy. That was an issue that angered us over there. This is another issue. There was so much press coverage in '83 on this. Forest exploded with blinding light, and it goes on with this, whatever they want to add to the truth, they do.
This is specifically about Larry, though. You can see the top says UFO lands in Suffolk, the airman story. This is the airman in question for this article.
But again, it isn't accurate, so it's not,
yeah,
but it's an interesting thing to see. Thanks, man. That's, This is coverage in Japan, and it looks like I'm trying to sell a TV to somebody, but there was a massive press conference in 1984, and again, the Japanese have almost a circus-like attraction to this phenomena. You can virtually get away with anything over there. I went sincerely to just tell what I knew, and they made me wear dark glasses, they made me, I shaved my mustache off one day and it was in the newspapers, and they like, why did he do it? And I was on these embarrassing TV shows, and yet I was on some good ones, but it was awful. But anyway, that was just a thing to say. In Japan, this case, by the way, is considered one of the foremost important events in UFO studies, and it should be. I think people rely too much on Roswell these days. I'm a little partial, but we're all still alive for the most part. These Roswell guys are getting long in tooth. That's the main gate in 90 at Bentwaters, and this is a picture Peter took in 1988 when I just got back to the site, and I was, in 85 I came, and it was too muddy, I couldn't get out there. But, like Elvis with the microphone, but I was actually kind of reliving the event. This is a picture I took through the windshield of a car in Rendlesham Forest in May of 1985. I was with my wife, and we're driving. Now, to give you an idea, you're familiar with how large this forest, beautiful forest. Well, it's vastly superior to most forests I've seen in the States. This is a bus, one of your tour coaches here, just to give an idea of the massive sweep. It's a beautiful place. We're going down the road. Now, in 1988, Peter and I are walking down this road in the midst of the destruction. We're going to go back and forth, if you will, but the next picture is taken virtually from this same spot, and look at the difference after what happened. That is potentially the result of weather weapons gone wrong. That's going to be a while to prove, but meteorologists and people who have looked at this stuff say 800-mile-an-hour winds would have to do this, if not more. These are not small trees.
One of the saddest things I've ever seen in my life. Without really taking the time to go into why we feel this is a machine gone horribly wrong or an intentional destruction of a forest by high technology, I'm going to ask Tony, who taped a fairly extensive interview with me today specifically on this, the discovery of Wilhelm Reich of a device that could modify weather for the best, and is still used in an isolated way, although isolated from acknowledgement, as most of this great genius's work are, because most people that hear of Reich, they hear of him or they read stuff about him. They have not read his work. Anyway, Tony, do you think it might be possible at your next meeting to screen that interview that we did today?
Yeah, sure.
Because if it is, folks should be aware and come to the next meeting, and it's just too much to go into right now, but if you go back and forward again, Omar, just for the impact. It's just the way it is. And you can still go out to Suffolk and see this destruction. I mean, there are new seedlings coming in. The British Forestry Service has done a magnificent job in reseeding, but the destruction is unbelievable, and it's heartbreaking. And it happened in 3 hours.
If it is weather weapons, then you guys have, I mean, look at this. This will all be gone by the time this comes back to what it was. And
It happened in 3 hours, there was no prediction, and there was not a drop of rain.
this is selective destruction right here. You did not have a tornado because the destruction didn't disperse trees for miles and miles. We have tornadoes in the States that are devastating. They'll take a house 50 miles and drop it. This is different. Something has come down, done its thing, gone up like a cookie cutter.
Yeah,
It's
it looked like a
amazing.
pie slice to me.
Still fit.
It happens.
What was that?
Looks like June here.
Okay.
Well, we can hit the lights.
Yeah, actually, that really is fine, Omar. Thank you very much.
A lot of these
really-
pictures will be recreated in the book, and plus many, many more. We're in Great Britain right now working on a couple of things. We've been coming back in October. We did to do final research on our book, which we're ready to rock and roll with. And on the other hand, we've also been doing a self-produced documentary. Hopefully, it'll be of some high caliber quality. I do have a background in production, and we're going to get this thing out. Basically a compilation or a companion to our book where people in the States who, the problem we have in America is that this event has been minimalized on tabloid programs like Unsolved Mysteries. A lot of people, researchers there, feel like, oh, that's an English event. And yet we were all a majority of Americans that went through it. Over here, it was a lighthouse, or it was whatever the press will want you to believe. But quite frankly, we've met so many people that said, I always thought there was more to that than just some lights or a misidentification. So we're pressing on. We're going to get this book out to you as soon as we can. And I imagine you hopefully have some questions.
Let me add one other thing before we go into questions. It is true that we genuinely feel that the enemy here is official government policies in the UK and the US, and overwhelmingly the media. However, thank goodness, there are always exceptions to the rule. One of the exceptions we feel that is in process right now is what in every way seems to us at this point a very serious documentary project in the works by Central Television and ITV that we participated in. In fact, I think Jenny Randalls is working with them today. It will be aired on ITV the first week of August later this year, and we hope you'll tune it in. Now, before we take some questions, let me just spend a few short minutes. My part-time, full-time job is I work as Bud Hopkins' assistant. Bud Hopkins is the preeminent researcher on the abduction phenomena. This is something that in the States, a number of books are already out on. Here, there are one or two. I know Jenny's written a book called Abduction. Philip Mantell and his partner have a book coming out very soon, which I think will be one of the really breakthrough books in this country on the phenomena. It is as disturbing as anything we've discussed today, and it involves histories of people, more than we would imagine. Some people who are in this room, I can say that for a fact. My sister, one of my sisters, it happened to her in this incident that I was knocked out on after I was down. Our best statistics, and I say this from the fact that one of the major pollster organizations in the United States was commissioned to the tune of about $80,000 from private sources 2.5 years ago to conduct a very serious poll on a random sampling of American citizens. And the specific results that we have received lead us to believe that possibly 1 person in 50 in the United States has been, against their will, taken, examined, and returned, sometimes as a part of a reoccurring history, by non-human beings. It is a shattering statistic, and it sounds, and I can see a few faces registering an appropriate disdain, like the worst kind of science fiction tripe. It is not. I wish anyone in here could sit in my place for one day and field these calls and see the photographs of the scars and go through the medical records and read the letters that these folks send us. It is happening. It's quite real. It is actually right now, we are getting more and more letters from folks in the UK who are either researching it seriously or feel that it has happened. And I open it up just in the thought that it is something that if anybody has some questions, we'll try our best to field them, because Larry has a great awareness of it and is an old friend of Bud's and certainly is up on the research and has spent time with me at work. We're open, the field is open right now, and we are.
I've been through it.
So let's take some questions.
There was one thing I'd like to say, because, you know, that wasn't the way it is, actually. When I have been through things since I was a kid with my mother and other members, well, my mother predominantly, but, and I know in England this abduction thing seems to be a problem for some researchers, and maybe in the States less so now. But I was always told that you can't have more than one experience, else you won't be taken serious. Well, quite honestly, even having one, you're not taken serious. And I have been through these events in my life more clearly the older I get. I've had people totally lucid that knew nothing about my involvement in UFOs see some very amazing things in my presence, and has caused a few relationships. So I have more than just observed the abduction phenomena from afar. I'm more intimate than I care to admit, which is a whole other area, but we delve in that in the book. One thing I just want to say before we do the questions is that in this phenomenon for you researchers, and I've come to this conclusion, that's why I say the press and government are the enemy on this. All too often you guys are too anxious to take one of your cases to the press because thank God, oh, you know, if I'm nice to them, if I put my suit on, if I act like, you know, an upstanding guy, they're going to give me a fair shake and we're going to get this information out, and most of the time you end up disappointed. I can almost guarantee you do. It's time, perhaps, to look at this as a grassroots social movement and do some fundraisers, raise your money, distribute your literature, join forces with other organizations, whether you have differences or not, work them out, but work them out quietly, because you end up looking like clowns. I'm not saying anyone personally here, but in general, like clowns, and it takes away from your organization's strength, and the government and the press sit back and gloat because they know you're your own worst enemy. So start putting it together and join it together and network with each other and know who your enemy is. It ain't Move Forward, it ain't Move On, it ain't the next guy, it's the press and the media. Try me out on that one and you'll see I'm right.
Okay, first question.
No questions. Okay, good night.
Good night. Be that way.
Larry, have you had any strange electrical phenomena associated with the...
I have for many years. Peter can comment on that, and also I was working with a production company. I have had anomalies around me all my life. There are other witnesses to the Bentwaters events who had previous UFO experiences to one degree or another. That is documented in the book, but unfortunately, I have electronic anomalies occasionally. I was being interviewed in San Diego, California, by a gentleman named Russ Estes, and I blew out all his, I mean, there was no other way, according to him, that this could have happened, but all the computers and cameras just went down. I blow lights out at Peter's house occasionally. I haven't done it in a while, and I've caused, you know, I'll hit lights and they just go. A lot of things. But who knows, you know.
How reliable
I don't
would you
think I'm
say
alone.
hypnotic regression was in discovering the truth about abduction stories?
That's a very good question. Hypnotic regression in the service of recovering repressed memories is right now a cause celeb of controversy in the psychiatric and the mental health professional community. Are hypnotherapists or regressive hypnotists somehow informing the patient? Are they suggesting or asking leading questions? I think it varies from hypnotherapeutic situation to situation. Again, I say this as a layman, but an informed layman who has had a lot of hands-on experience and an awful lot of witnessing time. Bud Hopkins, Professor David Jacobs at Temple University in Philadelphia, Dr. John Mack, are among the best people in the business. It is one of those areas where you don't have to be a medical doctor or a psychiatrist. If you're well trained, and if, as Bud does, when he works with a patient, with somebody who feels that they've had an experience that is upsetting them or fits this profile of abduction. If he asks a leading question, it is always a leading question in the other direction. If you're working with a person and you say, well, these beings, they must have been quite tall. And the person in the trance, if this is their recollection, will say, no, they're actually very short, etc., and so forth. What we find, and one of the things that does not come out in this research that much, but if you read Hopkins' books, David Jacobs' Secret Life, Thomas Bullard's compilation of 600 cases that have been reviewed, etc., you find that most of the folks that feel they've had these experiences have a good deal of conscious memory, and sometimes all the memory is conscious. Other people have a certain amount of information that they've put a lid on, or that has been repressed in them somehow. I can't speak as a professional, but I can say that hypnotic regression to retrieve compressed or repressed memories can be an extraordinarily powerful and positive tool if used properly and responsibly.
Can I ask about implants? Have you ever met anybody who's had any experience with it?
Yes, the gentleman says, he asks about implants. We have found, and again, it's a very disturbing part of this work, that over and over, individuals who have a history of this abduction phenomena have a small thing, a device. We do not know what it is, and I refuse to tell you because I don't know. It may be something that is used for tracking purposes. It may be something to affect behavior. It may be something to gather information. The ones that I've observed take different forms. They are literally all, you have to rule out every possibility of this thing being something that's a chance thing. Often it is inserted way up into the nasal cavity and is silicone based in like a very small wedge. Other times they take the form of a small metallic BB. Nature magazine, one of the most distinguished scientific publications in the world, did an analysis of one, I think 3 years ago. What they could come up with was that it was not natural, and that where it was could not have gotten there in any way by an accidental means. They leave scars, and these are things that we have dealt with over and over and over again. We have pages of medical confirmations that this is absolutely anomalous. A child, the proverbial sticking the pencil up the nose and creating a wound cannot be mistaken for a surgical procedure. They are not always in the nose. Sometimes they're located in other places. Numbers have been retrieved. What we keep finding again is this damn catch-22. You get a reputable laboratory, you ask them to analyze it, they do. They inevitably ask, where did this come from? What's the story? When you give them an idea, they do not want anything to do with releasing information on it that suggests that they might take seriously that it was put in place by non-human beings for whatever purposes. But this implant phenomena is very real. And again, I can only suggest the works of Hopkins and Jacobs and some of the pioneering researchers in this area to confirm it. Also, although I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, that piece in Nature magazine, maybe it's 1989, maybe 1990, I do not remember.
Is radiation there at all?
Never that I'm aware of.
Hold 1 second till the mic.
Do you think these beings have some objective in mind around us?
Absolutely. But again, I can only make educated guesses.
What
Even
would be your educated guess then?
I'll make several. One is that they have their own agendas, and whatever they are, they're their agendas, and we don't know what it is, and that's a respectable guess. Another is, and this is a very optimistic one, this planet, because of and I don't mean in this room, in fact, we are probably representative of more decent, humanistic people that want to see some good happen in this world and not continue the terrible process of poisoning our planet with radiation, with toxicity, with overpopulation. We are driving this planet to hell on a handcart. If things continue to go even another 50 or 100 years, we may have an uninhabitable place. It may actually be, what is going on is creating a slightly hybrided individual that is mostly human, but not totally,
to continue to persevere in this increasingly polluted, toxic atmosphere, to using some of them and some of us. I wish I knew. I wish to God I knew. Reproduction does seem to play a part in it. Many of the reports that we get, and they are documented, suggest that there is breeding or interbreeding that is being experimented with here. And again, we can only guess at the purposes. I refuse to tell you that I know, because I don't know. And I'm with my nose to the glass of seeing a number of hundreds of the best documented reports. I don't know. But there is some kind of modus operandi and some reason for it. I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer. Sir?
One strange phenomenon which seems to be largely confined to the United States is that of cattle mutilation. A number of people, notably Linda Moulton Howe, whom I've had the privilege of hearing, seems to imply that the circumstantial evidence strongly points to the involvement of this phenomenon, whatever it is. And it seems strange that this doesn't occur in the same way in other parts of the world. And I just wondered if you was inclined to agree with Moulton Howe. Possibly it's pointing towards some connection between the two phenomena.
I think Larry would agree with me. First, we know Linda, and we respect and admire her work in this area. She has done extraordinary work in a very difficult and disturbing field. What this gentleman is bringing up is the fact that since about 1978, as such, although it seems to go back earlier, in America, in rural areas, there have been documentations of the mutilation, not ritual mutilation, and not mutilation by, thrill-seeking, nasty, juvenile delinquents of animals, horses, cattle, sheep, etc. What we are always confronted with is the animal's carcass is found in an area, rural United States, North Dakota, Arizona, take your pick, where it would normally have been already attacked and at least partially scavenged by scavengers. These carcasses are never touched. Number two, organs are removed. Tongues, sexual apparatus, eyes, whatever. They are removed with a precision that you can only associate with laser surgery. There are often ground impressions to suggest that these animals were dropped into place. Again, we have never seen a situation where an authentic one has footprints leading in or out. Almost always, or very often, this is in an area where it is associated with incidences of UFO activity. These are grounded facts. I don't know why. Again, perhaps it's a tissue sampling. I know if I were trying to think scientifically and say, here I am in the southwestern part of the United States, nuclear generator 120 miles away from here, some toxicity in the water from an old copper mine, time for a tissue test. Zap that animal, grab it up, do a coring sample, drop them in place, take off, analyze it. It may be that simple, it may not. I also feel that there is probably a similar parallel going on where either for disinformation, confusion, or for a whole other set of purposes, or similar purposes, government or intelligence plays into this somewhat, and perhaps some of these mutilations are not necessarily non-human. Perhaps some of them are human, but again, they all fit this same profile. The carcasses are not disturbed. The disturbances are surgical in the way that they appear, and we've had that confirmed by numerous, and Linda's the best source as far as I'm concerned, pathologists, veterinarians, and animal breeders in these areas where these things happen. Why it seems to be happening more in the United States, I do not know. Maybe it's happening more but not recognized in other places as such. Maybe there's a reason that, it's happening where it's happening. I just don't know. Question?
Can I just comment?
One sec, and okay. You're next.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to comment on what you just said about the mutilations. We had a speaker come to our area once named Jeff Freed, who worked for the Home Office as a researcher for 5 years or so. And he explained to us that the American government had made some kind of a liaison with the Greys, and that the agreement between them was that they were to take so many cattle for their needs, and that they reneged and started abducting humans as well, and that the whole situation was more or less out of control.
Right. Well, all I can say is maybe that's true, maybe it's not. I have never, ever seen any real evidence that remotely suggests to me that that's anything beyond a marvelously attractive paranoid fantasy, the same way that we cut a deal with the aliens, we broke our agreement under President Eisenhower, that's why they're abducting people. The real work and the real observations are tough enough. Maybe it's true. Frankly, I feel it's cut out of whole cloth, and it's the kind of thing that gives this whole field the wonderful paranoid, psychotic dimension that it has to many rational folks. I just don't know, but my best gut sense is that that's an invention to try to explain some of this absolutely unexplainable material. Also, remember again, we are open to any questions on Bentwaters as well. Next, sir.
Excuse me. The other day, I've got a couple of members in my group, and we were talking about abductions, you know, and then one of them had a very red scoop mark, and the other person had a, you know, not quite as bad, but is that abduction?
The mark that this man refers to, a scoop mark, we have, I have to say, several hundred cases of people who come forward. They wake up, they've had a super real dream that they describe as not a dream. Often they're dressed not the way they went to bed. Sometimes they're facing the other direction. They may have bad eye irritation. And one of the things that we see most often, one can say, oh, it could be the signs of the stigmata where we create markings, or these people are attention-seeking sadomasochists who deface themselves for attention, exactly. But it looks like a miniature ice cream scoop of skin has been retrieved from the dermal layer, and there is never any blood associated with it. If they've been in bedclothes or against a sheet, there's no blood to be found, or in the rarest cases. And these scoop marks appear in a number of cases, in a number of places, sometimes on the knee, sometimes in the back of the knee, sometimes on the back. There are many places where we've seen them. It is one of the most, the thigh, the leg, it is one of the most common details that comes up over and over again in these alleged situations. All I can say is that if you get intruders or missing time and you flip through these books, you will see photographs that may be quite identical to what your friend or colleague has. You're certainly welcome to write us in New York on this, but the best thing we can do is say, yep, sure seems to be one. You know, good luck.
Do you know Tony Dodd?
I know who Tony is, but I don't, I've never met.
Well, he's involved there. These
Yes.
people are going there.
Yes. I just, yeah, I hope that over time this is taken more seriously in this country as it is in the States. The best that we've been able to do is we now have what amounts to an underground railroad of mental health professionals around the United States. We have had several hundred come forward discreetly over the last few years. Psychiatrists, psychologists, psychiatric social workers, emergency room nurses, different types of therapists who say, I take this phenomena seriously. I have a patient, I cannot figure out what else it is. For years, we were seeing this classic situation of a decent therapist has a patient present for therapy, their core gripe where it comes up in situations, I think I was abducted by aliens. Well, the doctor looks at the patient and says, obviously this couldn't be the case. Probably a veneer or a mask or a device to repress the fact that they were sexually abused as a child. If we can get to the core material, the hallucination will disappear. Over and over, we are reported. And this includes, again, mental health professionals of the highest caliber. April 20th, to digress for a moment, will mark the publication of a book by Dr. John Mack, Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at our distinguished Harvard University in Massachusetts, who has put his career on the line because he has found patients, I mean, people come to him, and there is no other way to explain this. I'm not even sure the point I was going to make here, except to say that, well, yes, what I do remember, that we can now, in some cases, if somebody writes us and say, please, I know I'm not crazy, this has happened to me, it's now happening to my child, I need to know I'm not crazy by talking to a mental health professional. Is there anyone in my area or my state that you can recommend I speak to? And we are now able to make some discrete referrals where people can meet, often on a pro bono basis, with a bona fide psychologist or psychiatrist that will take them seriously. I also have to say, in a small number of cases, when these mental health professionals approach us, and we are doing workshops around the United States at an irregular rate for them, to familiarize them with some of this material that we've put together and let them begin to deal with it. Because we're not mental health professionals and we're not physicians. A few of them have courageously said, or somebody might say, well, that explains it and they're crazy too, that the reason they got into the healing arts is because this is something that has happened to them. And that's all I can say about it. Questions?
Yes, this one's for Larry. Larry, was you not, or are you not covered by the Official Secrets Act?
I'm American. And I don't care if I was or not anyway. It hasn't stopped me yet, but I'm American. They can't, you know, they can keep me out of your country, but no, it doesn't bother me. Neither does the National Security Act of 47. You know, all they have to do is, who asked the question? The voices come, they just come down. You know, the day they really prosecute somebody or try to silence them in an official capacity, they're admitting that that person's right. And I don't think they're that foolish. They're up against the wall. This is coming down. And Bentwaters, and I can guarantee it, Bentwaters will be the one to move toward this. I have to tell you that my plan is right now, in the United States, I think for many reasons it's necessary. Colonel Holt recently made his disinformation statements to me and about me in Omni magazine without naming me. He also said that, and this is after we've been very good with the guy, and you know, I feel sympathy for him, but that's gone, it's gotten old, you know. That's his problem, as they say. On the other hand, he also made this off-the-cuff statement, and also those stories of holographic beings are untrue. Never in the history of this, me being involved with Bentwaters, have I ever heard about holographic aliens. Yet he made this off-the-cuff statement that that isn't true either. Very strange. What I am doing is meeting with a lawyer when I get back to the United States. I intend to, so far, if it's practical and I can get lawyers to take it, it does seem I have one that might be interested, on other things we've talked about around this, suing Mr. Holt, and you can disseminate this is fine, not because I want to hurt Mr. Holt, but suing him for defamation of character, where in fact my true motive is to get Mr. Holt into a court of law in the United States, have documents and evidence to this event subpoenaed, have other witnesses subpoenaed, and let's mess around with it in front of a judge and see where it goes. That is my plan and my promise.
And that is the perfect note to end on. We are at 13 minutes of the hour. We actually have to be out of here at 10. Thank you all for coming. God bless you all. We'll
Thank
see
you, really. We'll see you again.
I'd like to thank Peter and Larry for a fascinating presentation. Watch out for their book, it's going to be a blockbuster. It's called Left at Eastgate. It should be out by the end of the year. I'd like to thank Omar for the use of his projector. Also thank EMU4 staff for all their hard work. Our next meeting here will be on the 23rd of May, and it will be starting at 7:45 and it will be finishing at 10. Thank you all very much.